Okay, now everybody has to be quiet. All right, I'm Holly Williams. Welcome to this afternoon's Pikes Peak RTA meeting. I will go ahead and call the meeting to order. We do have a quorum. And our first item of business, if I could put kind of a little 1A in there, is to welcome our newest member, Mayor Todd. Remind me your last name. Dixon. I try to call you someone else. I'm sorry. Oh, you'll still get, now that you're elected, you'll get called even more. So Mayor Todd Dixon is the new mayor of Green Mountain Falls. And he will be joining us now in our meetings. We're happy to have him. You want to tell us anything about our beautiful, other than he came to one of our some of our interviews last week.
What would you like to know about Green Mountain Falls? Last night we did vote to terminate our paid parking agreement. So we don't no longer have that. Our trails are all open except for when we're doing fire mitigation. And so basically things are looking fairly good.
Awesome. That sounds wonderful. So we love coming up there in the summer. Okay. Yes. So, and we do have an interim county engineer here today for El Paso County. That's Josh Palmer. So, and other than that, our first item of business is the approval of the agenda. Are there any questions?
Seeing no questions, I move approval of the agenda. This is Wayne.
I'll second John Graham.
I do have a question after we do that. Since we do have a couple of new people, do we want to just go around the room and have everyone introduce themselves?
Sure. Everyone in favor of approving the agenda, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that passes. All right, let's go around the room and introduce everybody. I'm Holly Williams. I'm El Paso County Commissioner, and I am the chair for this year.
I'm Wayne Williams. I am a at-large member of Colorado Springs City Council, and this is my second time around on the Pikes Peak RTA board.
I'm Roland Gardine with the town of Callahan, Mayor Pro Tem. I'm the quiet one of the group.
Right here. Dennis Carpenter, Mayor Rama. Nice to have you aboard.
John Graham, Mayor Manitou Springs.
Again, I'm Todd Dixon. I'll try to yell so they can hear me on the mic.
Rick Sonnenberg, Pikes Peak RTA Program Manager.
And Deputy Public Works Director for the City of Colorado Springs.
Josh Palmer, Interim County Engineer.
Jennifer Ivy, Legal Counsel for the PPRTA.
Andy Gunning, Executive Director for the Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments, and also help out a little bit on PPRTA stuff.
Yolanda Avila, City of Colorado Springs, District 4, and I want you all to meet my new aide, Shelby Kinning, and that's her. So if you see her around and see her with Puma, that's what she's doing.
We also have a few audience members. If you want to stand up, we'll hear from Bev.
Jim Godfrey, Chair of CAC. Larry Clients, who's Chairman of the CAC. Tim Boddington, the Schultz, President of the Old North Land Neighborhood.
Louise Connor, Vice President of the Stratton Neighborhood Association.
Kyle Logan of Logan.
Okay, and thank you, everybody, for attending. It's a larger group than normal. We have public comment for items not on the agenda. We do have some guests here to speak for items on the agenda. So is there any other public comment? Okay, two other things. We do have Commissioner Geithner online. She is a voting member. And then we also have council member and Vice Chair Randy Helms is excused for today. He is in Washington, D.C. So he's not here to keep me on track. Okay, so if there is no public comment, then let's go to the approval of the minutes from the May 11th meeting. Any questions on the minutes? Okay,
Yolanda, move to approve.
we have a motion
Second, John Graham.
and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay, that passes. Any opposed? I'm not opposed, so that one passes unanimously. The next one is number 5, the presentation of the 2021 audit. I have Kyle, right? Okay, come on up.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. I just introduced myself, Kyle Logan with Logan and Associates, the Pikes Peak RTA's independent audit firm. And so I'm here this afternoon to present the results of the audit of the Pikes Peak RTA's 2021 financial statements. And so you received 2 documents in your packet. One is the financial statements. The other document I refer to as a management letter. And so our process is, we pick samples of disbursements to make sure that money that's being paid out to vendors and various contractors has proper approval, proper recording in the accounting records. We also extend that testing to make sure that, expenditures for capital projects are actually being paid for projects that were approved in the ballot issues. We also send out third-party confirmations to confirm balances that are reported in the accounting records with the financial institutions. We confirm the sales and use tax revenues with the state to verify that, all the revenues that are being reported in the financial statements are what the state says that they distributed to the RTA. And then finally, we do some detailed testing of certain balances within the accounts, analytically comparing 2021 numbers with 2020 numbers and picking Bev and Rick's brains of what's going on and what changed between the years. And so after that process is done, then that gives me a level of comfort in order to issue an opinion on the financial statements. And so following the table of contents is the independent auditor's report. And I will say that all the numbers in this document and all the footnote disclosures in this document are responsibility of the RTA's management. My responsibility is to audit that information and issue an opinion. And so this year, the independent auditor's report is in a new format. We actually added another part of a page in it. But the good thing about it is that the opinion paragraph is at the very first, where before it was near the end of the report. So I actually like that. And so for the year ended December 31st, Pikes Peak RTA received an unmodified opinion. And what that means in layman's terms, that's a clean opinion. That is the best that a local government entity can receive from an independent auditor. What that tells you as a board is that tells you all the financial statement numbers, all the footnote disclosures in this document are materially correct and in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles and reporting for a local government entity. So that's good. Okay. And then following the independent auditor's report, which I believe Beverly passed out, was the management's discussion and analysis. These 4 pages primarily are a written narrative talking about activities that happened in 2021, has some high level comparison between 2021 and 2020. And then following the MD&A, we get into the financial statements, pages 1 through 4. And so I'll tell you, pages 1 and 3 are very similar. The statement of financial position and the governmental balance sheet. Okay. And so when you look at those, your total assets for the year, about $283.7 million, which is about $68 million increase over 2020, which is about a 32% increase. Now, what makes up your assets? The majority is in your cash and investments, which is about 91% of the total at $257.5 million. And your accounts receivable, which is primarily the sales taxes that are received from the state. So, and that accounts receivable makes up about 9%. So those two are your significant line items in your total assets. Your total liabilities were about 17.9 million, which is about 1.9 million over 2020. So we had a slight increase. And then your net position, fund balance, or net worth ended about 266 million, which is about a 66 million increase over last year, or a 33% increase. And of course, of your net position or net worth, 99% of it is restricted. It's restricted for capital. It's restricted for maintenance and transit. It's also restricted for Tabor. Okay. And so really, you know, you may look at it and you think, oh gosh, we've got a lot of money, but you all know that once these construction projects start, that money can go fast, especially on these larger projects. So it's not like you're sitting here hoarding money. It's just because of the timing. 2021 was pretty much significantly a planning year. Okay. And so as time goes and these construction projects ramp up, you know, we will see that cash position and your net worth will change over the upcoming years. Okay. So then following page 1, pages 2 and 4, this is your statement of activities or your governmental funds, statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance, primarily your income statements. Okay. And so, as I mentioned, 2 and 4 are pretty much the same. The only difference is that on page 2, the expenses are listed first and then the revenue second. And on page 4, it's flipped. The revenues are listed first and the expenses second. So your total expenses for the year was about 89 million, about a $9.9 million increase from 2020, which again, as I mentioned, you know, in your planning years, you don't have as much cost and expense. Okay. And so that's a significant reason for where the expenditures are this past year. Your revenues, about 155 million. And again, you know, the majority of that are the sales taxes. That's an increase of about 29 million or 23% over prior year. And again, you know, I've seen this throughout all of my municipal and local government clients that are collecting sales taxes, especially during the period of COVID. You know, a lot of people started doing online sales and purchases. And so you know, when that ruling came out a few years ago that you're to collect sales tax on online sales, then that has been a significant impact on sales taxes in the local government environment. So your net income ended up, as I mentioned, 66 million, or about an increase of 33% in your fund balance. So then following the financial statements are the footnotes, pages 5 through 11. And so there are certain things that need to be disclosed to support either the numbers in the financial statements or just required disclosures related to accounting policies of the Pikes Peak RTA. And so on pages 5 through 8, note 1, this is your significant accounting policies. And if you look at this and compare it with other local governments, it's very similar as far as the descriptions. But then we get to pages 9 and 10, and this is your cash and investments. And as you can see, the majority is invested in call out trusts. And I know it's kind of a common thing since 2008. We haven't seen much in terms of investment earnings on any type of investment vehicle or financial products. So again, hopefully in the coming years that will change. And then on page 11, we have the Tabor footnote disclosure. Again, that's required. And then we disclose the administrative agreement between Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments. And then also I left in there the uncertainty paragraph related to the COVID pandemic, because again, it's still out there and we don't know what the impacts may be from a financial standpoint. So hopefully in 2022, we can remove that. And then finally, the last page is a budget comparison schedule. And so again, each year in December, you as a board adopt a budget that's submitted to the state. And so budget statute requires that, local governments don't overspend what they expect to. And so again, that's something we look at when we're performing the audit. And you're safe to say that we were well under what you guys had appropriated and amended your budget during the year. So that's good. And so that kind of covers the financial statements. Any questions before I move on to the management letter? Okay, so then the other document is a management letter. And our professional standards as the independent auditors require us to communicate certain things to you, the governing board of the Pikes Peak RTA. And so it talks about our responsibilities as your auditors. It talks about, if there were significant accounting estimates, which there were none this year, changes in accounting policies, again, there were none. Significant audit adjustments, we had none. So that's good news. What that tells you as a board, that tells you that the numbers in the final audited financial statements are the same numbers that you have seen throughout the year at your meetings, okay? That also tells you that policies and procedures that have been put in place by this board and previous boards are being followed by management. And it also tells you that those policies and procedures allow for good, sound financial reporting for the Pikes Peak RTA, okay? So that's great news. It's kind of a boring letter, as I like to say, because we don't have anything to come up and say, okay, we found this weakness or this issue. So the other thing is, no disagreements or issues performing the audit. If we had, you would have heard from me before today. So that's always good. And finally, I want to thank Rick and Beverly for their help. They have the hard part during this audit process because they have to dig for information and answer questions of things, and events that have happened, a year to 16 months ago. And so it really helps us in performing the audit and allowing for a smooth and efficient audit to be performed. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, are there any questions regarding the audit? Would just like to thank Rick and Bev, and go ahead, Mr. Williams.
Thanks. It's not a question as a comment, particularly for our new member, but also for members of the public who might look at the budgetary comparison schedule for the general fund and wonder why some of the numbers are there. So I just want to take a brief moment to explain. There are lots of places that build based on a promise that someday revenue will come in. The process that we established when we adopted the Pikes Peak RTA is that we would have the cash and then we would build and we would not go into debt. And that was part of the promise made to the voters, is that we would not go in debt. And so when our auditor talks about there are some years where you're accumulating money so you can build large projects like we have underway at a host of things, Black Forest, South Academy, and others along that. We have to have the cash in place to do that. And so we also traditionally have followed a process of wanting the cash for the whole project. So you don't say, well, I've got enough money to build half a circle bridge and build half of it and then stop waiting for the money to come in. And so that's why you see a fairly large amount of the capital expenditures process. The other thing that seems a little odd is the maintenance. And if you look, originally we had a $36 million budget for maintenance activities. This is all on page 27 of the packet or page 12 of the auditor's report. We increased it to 67 million, and we did that because as revenues began to come in, we felt confident in being able to make that change. But a mid-year change is difficult for jurisdictions to necessarily get the work done because some of it requires planning and a process and bidding. And so the actual work done was 45 million, which is 9 million more than the original budget. But they weren't able to get all of those dollars out the door that year because we increased the budget in around this time of year, I think is about when it was. And so those dollars didn't flow into this year, but I just want to kind of explain why that's there. It's not that we have money we don't know what to do with. It's that it takes time to get an increase in maintenance dollars out the door. And for the large capital projects, we have to have the money and then the design, and some of that we can do simultaneously, but we're also having to buy right of way, and all of that means there's a little bit of delay between when the cash comes in and when it goes out. And so that's my long-winded explanation, but I thought it's important because someone looking at this could say, why are you renewing the RTA? And the answer is because it does what it promised, which is we use cash, we build the projects, but that means there's sometimes this little lag that takes place.
That was very good. Thank you. We had, was it a 33% increase in revenue? I don't think we're going to see that this year. So, but that's not a prediction because I don't have a crystal ball.
And one thing I might add to what Mr. Williams said is that on page 1, you know, it's like there's different buckets. And so it shows the amounts that have been collected over the years that are restricted for your capital projects. So, you know, that's about 190 million. Roadway maintenance and repairs is about 29 million, and then transit services at about 40 million. So if you're ever curious, you know, how that's divvied up, that's what you look at. And I know Beverly and Rick have done a good job, and your accounting system is set up such that you're able to track that. Because I don't always see that with smaller governments being able to track what the money set aside for, stipulated for. So that's good.
Yes. So Rick and Beverly, thank you for the wonderful job that you do. And it's always good to have good news. If there are no other questions or comments, I would take a motion to accept the 2021 audit.
I move acceptance of the 2021 audit.
That was Mayor Graham.
John Graham.
Mayor Pro Tem Gardine Callahan, second.
And we have a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that passes with a big thank you to Mr. Kyle Logan for doing that for us,
Thank you.
and as well as to our staff. Okay, now we are up to the Citizens Advisory Committee. Jim Godfrey.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. Jim Godfrey, Chair of the CAC. At our meeting last week, just review a couple things with you. Bev presented a mid-year budget amendment that you'll see today, and we recommended that budget amendment be approved. City of Colorado Springs presented 6 contracts After discussion of those, we recommend approval for those cities' contracts. Manitou Springs presented one, and same, we recommend approval of that as well. Then we got to the PPRTA 3 proposed capital project list. This was the first of 3 reviews that will take place. We had a good presentation. Each member government presented their proposed projects in this first iteration for approval. A lot of discussion on that, and we voted on it as a complete package, not by entity. And so the vote was 13-1 to approve the projects as presented. Just a couple of notes that, oh, and then on the other one was the RTA 3 draft ballot language. And we recommend that approval as presented on that as well. During the discussion on the list, it was noted that each of the entities did not use the same percentage of expected revenue. And I think maybe Rick might want to further address that at some point during the process, but they were not consistent with the board guidance on that. So, but other than that, that was about it for the CAC report. Any questions?
Okay, are there any questions on the CAC report? All right, there being no questions, I'll take a motion to accept the CAC report.
I'll move acceptance of the CAC report. John Graham.
And a second.
Mayor Carpenter, second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our monthly financial report, Beverly.
Good afternoon. Today we received $12,925,000 for the month of April, which was $528,000 above the monthly budget, or 4.3%. And then on the second page, so it's not as good a news as prior months, but still good news. On the second page, we're comparing April actual to last year April actual, and we were $795,000 ahead, or 6.6%. The remainder of the pages are the sales and use tax and the financials, and the expenditures listed by maintenance, transit, and capital project. So are there any questions?
Are there any questions on the financial report? Okay, there being no questions, we'll go ahead and thank you for that report. Now we're going to talk about the 2022 budget amendment. Beverly.
Okay, so with this year's budget amendment, I'm going to go over a few of the general assumptions for this budget amendment. And then the member government staffs, you can either have them do a presentation or ask questions. And then in the end, we need to set the public hearing date for July 13th at 1:30. So for this amendment, on page 1, we have a comparison of last year's actual budget to the actual income, and we have the carryover of that. Our gross sales and use taxes were 8.7 million over last year's budget. We saved 104 on the cost to collect sales tax, and we had interest earnings of 36,000 almost over the budget. And so that rolls up to 8.9 million, and that was allocated to capital, transit capital and maintenance on that page. Then on the next page, page 2, we added for this amendment $6 million of sales and use tax. And when we net out the 10% reserve adjustment, we have $5.4 million that we added to transit, maintenance, and capital in this budget amendment. The third page shows what the total is for this year, the revised total, 156 million in sales and use tax. So that's the basis of this budget. Then on page 4, 5, and 6, it's a columnar format for the financial statements with the 2021 expenditure carryover in the first column, the 2021 revenue carryover, which we talked about on page 1, the 2022 original budget, and then the 2022 $6 million of additional revenue. And it adds up, goes across to the total, and we have a column for line item transfers, which I believe the city had some on page, let me look. Yeah, on page 5 of that report. So it's a pretty simple way to show what totally each capital item is going to be for this amendment. And would you prefer to have each member government get up and go over their memos, or would you like to just ask questions? I know Gail wanted to cover an item.
Gail with the city is going to cover an item.
Yes, Madam Chair, and in doing so, I'd like to just to highlight maybe some of the overall changes in our budget that kind of contributes to the memo, which is included in your packet.
Okay.
We talk about advancing the Mark Shuffle and Burns intersection. So with the city's budget amendment, there are 6 major components. The first is to transfer $1 million from the Airport Road project to the Centennial Boulevard Extension project. Airport Road, we know, is wrapping up. It is open. We have a ribbon cutting tomorrow for that particular project. We do have in excess of $1 million left in that for contingency for that project. So there's more than enough funds to see that through the closeout and warranty period. So we're proposing to transfer $1 million of that to Centennial, knowing that we're going to have a large Centennial Boulevard change order coming for the board's consideration here in the near future. The next one is the intersection improvements and roadway safety program, where we have a total of 4.87 million that's going in there. And most of it, or a bulk of that, would be going into the Mark Shuffle and Barnes intersection improvements. 500,000 of that does stay in that program for the purpose of helping with the 31st and Fontenera intersection improvements. The next one is we have $504,000 going in the pedestrian transportation improvements to serve as a local match for TAP funding that we received to provide additional missing sidewalk throughout the city. The Black Forest Road project, we are proposing to transfer $3 million out of the contingency. Now that we have construction bids for that project, we still are having some contingency in reserve, but we want to take $3 million out of that project and put it towards the Mark Shuffle and Barnes intersection improvements. I will mention at some point in time, you will see a large change order in that project, but I have $1.9 million in ARPA money designated through the city to handle a bulk, if not all of that change order. Transit does have a line item transfer to cover additional costs for their ADA paratransit bus system, and that's the amount of $108,580. And then we have another $200,000 that goes in the roadway and safety and traffic operations to help cover some planning study efforts. So the reason why I wanted to go through that, because you heard me take over $4.5 million out of the intersection improvement project, or leave it in the intersection improvement projects, and put $3 million from Black Forest Road in there as well. In the back of your packet for the city's budget memo, I have really what's a funding plan to help address one of the major intersection issues we are currently experiencing within the city. And this is for the Barnes and Mark Shuffle Road area. As you can see from this plan, we would have $2.36 million coming from the city's general fund and attributed to the Ben and Lewis Ranch annexation, a total of $7.37 million from the intersection improvements program, and some carryover dollars from Pprta one to help cover a bulk of that cost. You can also see on the table that there's a minimum of 2 additional developer contributions along Mark Shuffle Road anticipated to help fund that project. And as the county wraps up some of their work on Pprta 1 efforts, that those monies could be available to be attributed to that project. So overall, we've put together between 9.8 to $11.2 million to really address the construction of this intersection. If you're familiar with the operation on Mark Shelford Road right now, we're having operational issues and some safety concerns, and we've discussed it before with the board in the past. We've also been working on advancing engineering plans so we could have the plans ready for construction as soon as dollars were available. In this particular area, the plans are nearly complete. We have the available right of way, and this would give us an opportunity to provide relief on the Mark Shelford and Dublin intersection, and really the only western egress that currently exists for the Banning Lewis Ranch development. Also, with the advancement of this intersection, it would be the right first stage to help advance construction in the future for Mark Shelford roads. If you look at construction phasing of that overall corridor, and also the developer for Banning Lewis Ranch is planning to advance the extension of Barnes from Banning Lewis Ranch Parkway to Mark Shelford in the near future. So it would be good for us to make those intersection improvements and have that linkage for them and provide an alternate western egress from the Banning Lewis Ranch area. The other thing with this particular plan, there's actually off ramps built in it as well if we feel like there's going to be economic issues as we go through the construction season and funding some significant projects. As Bev alluded to, or maybe, I apologize, it was actually Mr. Godfrey alluded to, we have the Circle Drive bridges, which we should have bid prices in the August board meeting. We will be receiving the South Academy projects bids on June 23rd. So it's going to give us a good indication of where we are standing overall in the overall projections. If we feel like those costs come in higher than expected, we have the ability to curtail this effort and redistribute funds or do a line item transfer. The other thing that we've done and included in your packet, we took the city's capital improvements plan for the capital projects, and for the large projects that are still outstanding, we added 20% to the overall total project cost to show an over contingency with just what we're seeing in the economy. Those are highlighted in yellow in your packet, so you could see where those changes are. And it does demonstrate there would be enough funding to complete the A-list projects in addition to funding this intersection improvements. So with that, if you have further questions, that's really the city's overall presentation of both our budget and really what we'd like to do to address this concern.
Mr. Williams.
Thank you. Gail, a couple of questions for you. When you say highlighted in yellow, which document do you think is highlighted in yellow?
So in the back, well, how I presented it, I believe it's attached with the memo that I just reviewed about funding the Mark Shelford and Burns intersection. There's a city's capital improvements program. It looks like
Do you
this.
have the page number of our
Jessica, is there a way you could help me out on this, please?
16-page document?
Oh, keep going. That's near this section. It should be. Oh, keep going one more too. It should be right here. I apologize. It appears it is not in your packet.
Okay, I wasn't trying to be obnoxious. I just.
No, you're correct. I thought that it was. It must have got dropped between the CAC
Okay.
and
So
the board meeting.
Can you email that out to the whole board, please? afterwards?
Absolutely.
Okay. So let me then clarify some things that, as I understand from what you've just said. First, the two projects we're transferring money out of, Black Forest and
Airport Road.
Airport, have enough money to be built based on our reasonable contingencies, even with transferring these out because of the bids that came in.
That is correct, sir.
Okay. So not adversely affecting those. Second question for you. And this is going to be a question for the county as well, just so you're aware that, as we're looking at these budget amendments, how close does this bring us to funding or having the funding necessary for the A list? How much do we still have that's not anticipated in the amended budget?
So if you had the the plan that I thought was going to be in your packet, with those 20% increases on those large projects and even the ones that are mid to smaller size projects, I'm projecting a range of 5.4 to 9.2 million at the end of the program, funding all the A-list activities,
Okay, so these changes.
just for the city.
For the city's side, still show us successfully completing all of our A-list projects.
That is correct, sir.
Okay, thank you. And those were my 2 questions. Appreciate it. Yolanda's got one.
Go ahead, Councilmember Avila.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Gail, when I hear about, the line transfer item, from airport, $1 million. So are you going to say we came in under budget on that? Because we have the ribbon, it's completed, right?
It is completed. And overall, yes, we are going to be coming in under budget. We were very fortunate when we did the bids on Airport Road. We got very, very competitive bids. So that's a benefit to the project. So as we wrap up, we will be finishing under budget and still have funds that we will be able to transfer to another A-list activity.
Yeah, so the ribbon cutting on that's tomorrow at 2:00 there,
Yes.
but I just get concerned because the transfer line item is going to Centennial. And it seems like this has been happening from the Academy, South Academy. I think we were going to do something at Airport and Academy earlier or Fountain and Academy, I think, to make ingress and outgress easier. But it's like, so it's going to Centennial or we'll go to, I think of the Northwest or Northeast. And I hear that, that we're still going to finish everything, but how much does it delay it in terms of South Academy? Because that was supposed to start groundbreaking in June, I think.
And we're still intending to have the construction contractor selected on June 23rd.
But they won't break ground until like the fall or something. Right?
They likely will need a couple months in advance. So you're correct. It would be late summer, early fall.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering why that money wouldn't go to the South Academy Bridge or to the bridges at Circle and Academy.
Well, right now, we feel like with the engineer's estimates, we have that appropriately funded. And we're with Centennial, we know we have a large change order coming. So, and I think I may have mentioned it previously, Centennial, as it ends today, the west or the eastern termini is on the west side of I-25. And the reason why it was stopped there because the Fontenero Railroad bridges happen to be directly east of I-25. And we needed to advance that engineering effort for those bridges and know how that road profile was going to look before we tied those 2 projects together. We now have enough design certainty on those Fontenero bridges. We were able to do the engineering piece underneath the I-25. So this change order will extend the Centennial work from the west side of I-25 to the east side of I-25. So which is can be very helpful when we do go to construct those bridges, because as folks start using the Fontenero interchange to use Centennial, we'll be able to keep that intersection underneath I-25 operational at all times and keep the work on the rail bridges to the east somewhat isolated. So it's important for us to do this extension now. Now, going back to, I think, your base question, if we have significant bid increases on the South Academy projects, what we've demonstrated, again, I apologize, in the CIP that's not in your packet, that if we need, I put a 20% contingency on the total project costs on both those South Academy projects and demonstrated where those can be funded in the next couple of years, why those are under construction to still deliver those, even if we do have cost increase. When those bids come in and we bring them back to present to the board in July, if there's still concern about not being able to deliver the A-list projects, we could curtail our efforts on for the intersection improvements and do a line item transfer from there into South Academy or other projects should they come in. Same thing with Circle Drive bridges.
I just wanted to put that on the record in case there's a delay or we end up with some issues with funding down the road as we're completing those projects.
All right, thank you.
All right, those were all very good questions. Does anyone have questions on the remainder of the packet? Any of the other entities that are amending the packet as well? I just looked through them real quick. Go ahead.
Well, as promised, the same question for El Paso County, and I'm not that I don't care about the smaller entities, I do, but in many cases, they've already funded all their projects. So does this fully fund El Paso County's projects by when?
Really, if you include expected revenue in the next couple of years, the only project that we are currently showing deficient funding would be South Academy. So what happened on that project was we recently received the final plans from our consultant, and we have been piggybacking on to CDOT's MAMSIP project delivery method, which was a CMGC. So we went through the opinion of probable cost, we had independent consultant construction estimate. We found out that we were significantly underfunded based on the contractor and the ICE estimate. So we're currently working with our consultant to revise our scope. And as you can see in our budget amendment, we requested our portion of the budget increased revenue to go towards that project was $2.2 million and some change. So as of right now, that is the only project that we are seeing questionable funding deficiencies. But we are working with our consultant to revise, to do some value engineering, to look for some opportunities to find funding elsewhere, as well as the recommended budget amendment allocation.
Okay. Any additional questions?
I will mention that Green Mountain Falls is going to be doing their Stilling Basins project. They'll be bringing a contract forward, we believe, next month. So that will get underway.
Can I ask, what is a Stilling Basin? It sounds like a nice, quiet meditation spot.
Well, there's probably not much quiet about it.
Okay.
No, what we have is we have a lot of decomposed granite, and most of our roads are decomposed granite. And during heavy rainfalls, all that material just washes down, just like you see going up Highway 24, all that stuff. We get a lot of that. And what's been happening, it's been going into our lake.
Okay. Yeah.
And so we're trying to put something in to try to capture it before it goes into the lake.
Okay.
So.
That helps. Probably not stilling at all, maybe even a little cold. Okay, so what we need to do then is set this budget for a public hearing date of July 13th at 1:30.
This Swain, move approval.
We have a motion to that effect
I'll second John Graham.
and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, any opposed? All right, so we will approve this budget hopefully next month at public hearing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, so now we have the City of Colorado Springs on number 8A for the capital maintenance and public transportation contracts. Gail.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Gail Sturdivant, City of Colorado Springs. The city is presenting 6 contracts for the board's consideration. The first contract is for the Circle Drive Bridge Replacement Construction Management Services. The city did go through an RFP process for this. We had 2 respondents. The city has selected Benish. This contract is in the value of $2,120,172. This is an initial contract amount, and I will let you know that this has about a duration to handle about 18 months worth of construction. Depending on the selected contractor's means and methods, the duration of that construction could go up to 30 months. So we were not comfortable putting the construction management services in place for that duration at this time. So as we get contractors selected, we'll be able to provide a better idea on the overall certainty, but there is a window for construction that's allowed in the contract to get better bid prices, honestly, on the work and depending on the contractor's means and methods. To give you an update where we are selecting construction contractors, we are pre-qualifying contractors as we speak. We've had 6 respondents. They all, from a cursory look, looks like we're going to have a good pool of folks that will be bidding on this. We anticipate bringing construction bids for the board's consideration at the August meeting. City's next contract is for the Black Forest Road widening. This is a contract for Mountain View Electric to cover the cost for the relocation of their services, which they do have in an easement, so we are required to pay them for it. This estimate is in the amount of $1,337,218.36. There would be a final reconciliation of the total cost upon completion of installation of their work. Question? All right, the city's third contract is a maintenance contract to complete the downtown concrete assessment program. The city selected a contractor based on through an RFP process and our on-call predetermined rates to start assessing the concrete conditions and gives us the ability to make a plan on how to do concrete rehabilitation in the downtown area. This initial contract or this contract is for $233,310 and would be awarded to Basis Partners. Questions? All right, the next one is the city's asphalt overlay contract. The city went through an RFP process. We had 3 bids. After we received the bids, we did a best and final offer with our 3 vendors that you can see listed in your memorandum. You can see that Schmidt Construction did come in the lowest bid, but their bid price was still $7.6 million. The city has $5 million budgeted for that effort. So we reduced the paving list to make sure that the efforts that are being contracted with Schmidt are in line with the available budget for that item. Questions on that?
I would just recommend that you not stop right in the middle of one. So don't
We'll
get
do our
halfway
best.
here and halfway there,
Gotcha.
because if you stop and don't do the middle, you get a lot of complaints.
Yes. The city's 5th contract is for the chip seal program. We have gone through an RFP process in the past. This is the second option year for A1 chip seal. We did go through a best and final offer with this consultant that had been selected just to make sure we were getting the most competitive price just based on the bidding environment and material availability right now. We felt like they came in and came very competitive and in line with what we would expect to see for chip seal. This contract would be awarded in the amount of $1,676,136.74 to A1 chip seal. And the city's last contract is the annual maintenance renewal cost for the Centrix construction management software. As you recall, we are in the process of implementing new project management and construction management software right now. But as we're going through and doing that crossover between the Centric, our old program, and our new one, we do need to pay the maintenance fee for this, and it will be spread out over the multiple projects that it's used upon. That annual fee is for $29,760.
All right, if there are no questions on the city contracts, we'll take a motion to approve them.
Move approval, John Graham.
And a second.
Roland Gardine, Mayor Pro Tem, second.
We're going to just start alternating over here. Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, any opposed? All right, there's none opposed. Let's go on to the city of Manitou Springs has a contract.
Right, and I don't think our Public Works Director, Jeff, is on, so I'll go ahead with that. So we have, it's basically one contract. This is for maintenance work on 3 streets and 1 neighborhood in Manitou Springs. It came in, it was a pretty attractive bid, $152,000, close to $153,000. The other bid was $250,000. This is pretty much routine maintenance on some streets that badly need it. Be happy to
Okay.
answer questions.
Does anyone have any questions? All right, there being no questions, I will make the motion to approve Manitou's contract. Okay, we have a first and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. All right, there being no opposed, now we can go on to, that passes. The City of Colorado Springs Transit Services monthly update.
Good afternoon. Brian Vituli with the City of Colorado Springs, Mountain Metro Transit with your monthly transit update. Excuse me. For our local fixed route bus services for the month of April, we provided a little over 159,000 trips. We operated 30 out of 30 days. That is just about 5% higher from April of 2021, but still quite a bit low from April of 2019, pre-COVID times. We are operating all of the services that we have, but we're still operating some routes with lower frequency because we're still suffering from our operator shortage or bus driver shortage. But we are operating everything that we should be operating. And overall, you know, generally this time of the year, during the warmer months, ridership does tick upwards. So we're seeing a little bit of that for the month of April, and hopefully that trend will continue, and our operator shortage issue will lessen in the coming months, and we can hopefully build back to where we were sometime before 2020. For our ADA paratransit services, we provided about 9,600 trips. That's 26% up from April of 2021, but still down from 2019. For our specialized paratransit taxi choice option, so this is a service that's offered for, it's a premium passenger service that's offered to Mountain Metro Mobility passengers whose rides are generally 7 miles and below. But that service was discontinued during the pandemic. It just started up again last year, and it's still somewhat slow to respond. For April of 2020, we saw 61 passenger trips operated on that, and that's actually a decrease of 7.5% from the previous month. And finally, for our Vanpool services, we operated 7 vans in April of this year. There were 39 active riders, and they made about 970 one-way trips. And this is still something that is slow to respond. It's up from April of 2021, but still down considerably from pre-COVID times. But we're hopeful that the situation will continue to return back to some semblance of normalcy. So, are there any questions?
Yes, Councilmember Avila.
See, it's on.
There you go. It's on.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Brian. One of the things I've been thinking about is that we've had a shortage of bus drivers, right, for the fixed routes. And we have 2 contracts, one for Metro Mobility and then one for the fixed bus routes. And we're still under shortage, but yet we got a downtown circular, and we have enough bus drivers for that. And I think the fix was to get another contract, right? So I'm just wondering how that works, because it seems like we need to have the drivers on the fixed route first to be up to speed. You know, at one point we had gotten to 5 routes, I think, that are 15-minute frequency. And I don't know how many have come back to 15-minute frequency. Could you answer that?
None yet.
None. And yet we have the downtown circulator that, you know, and these routes that really get people, you know, to UCCS to the Nevada corridor, southeast to Citadel to downtown. Those are so important. And I can't see that ridership would go up until we get those frequencies back, that we'll get back to the ridership that we need. I don't know what we need to do to be creative to get us to the bus drivers that are needed for that. That's just one comment, and I've been thinking about that. The other, as an insider who uses Metro Mobility here and there, I before 2019, I would like to take the taxi option because you could be on the bus for an hour or so, because that's 5 people can get on that bus and they can drop you at different destinations. So you have to make your rides, 24 hours in advance or more, and stay on the bus a long time. So with the taxi option, which was really great, you could, schedule your ride, and usually on the time that you schedule, the cat taxi would show up and take you directly to your destination. But what's happened after COVID is that it's with the dispatchers, and I think the dispatchers are in Utah. Are they in Utah still? Do you know, Brian?
No, we have dispatchers on site.
Are they on site? Because since I've attempted to take the taxi about 4 times, and what's happened, for 1 out of the 3 times they showed up about a half hour late, but the other 3 times they never showed up. And what I understood was that people weren't even getting the ride till 20 minutes before, and we had to make the reservation 24 hours in advance. So I was wondering if you could talk to whoever the dispatchers are to, say, hey, you've got this contract and it's a pretty good contract, and make sure that you do send these out to your drivers the night before, so they have a heads up. And when I did get picked up, they're like, they just put this on the board 20 minutes ago. And so, and I take Uber and Lyft a lot too. And so a lot of times they don't show up, and there's a lot of issue with transit after COVID. So I think now we should be able to start tightening things up and getting back to normal, if you will. So basically those are comments, but maybe we can talk about it.
Yeah, I can briefly address those. The second one on the taxi program, we are aware that our contractor is having some issues with the taxi program, and whether that's related to why the ridership is still somewhat low, there could be a correlation, but we are aware of that. We're trying to work with our contractor to correct that. And going to your first comment, now the downtown shuttle was something that we really had to start before Memorial Day. We were really wanting to get that service up and running, but knowing that there is an operator shortage, what we did was do an emergency procurement with another fixed route contractor. So we actually now have 2 fixed route contractors. One is providing the operators just for our downtown shuttle service, so we could get that operational. And then we still have our existing fixed route contract that does the remaining fixed route services. And, there was kind of a non-compete clause in there that the new contractor could not steal operators from the existing contractor. So these are all new operators. They're offering higher wages than in the past. So I think that's what's contributing to the better condition we're in with the operator shortage. So hopefully, as more folks go back to work, and the wages and benefits being offered by these contractors, the operator shortage issue will lessen over time. But yeah, we're on the hook to start the downtown shuttle service, and that's the way we handled that, was to secure another contractor to operate that. And that the next few items on our punch list is to go back to 15-minute service. That's the only service related issue that's still not put back to normal. And when we get more operators, You're talking of about a fair amount of operators too, because to go from 30-minute service, which is where we're currently at on the North and South Academy routes, from Route 1 from downtown Colorado Springs to the Academy Hancock area, to go from 30-minute service to 50-minute service requires a lot of additional bus operators. So we're not comfortable with putting back a few operators here and there. We need to wait until we get a substantial amount of operators to put that service back. But those are the next items on our list to do.
So there's two separate contracts, right? One for a contract for Metro Mobility and then, or the paratransit, and a
Oh.
contract for the fixed routes. Yeah,
Well, now we have two fixed route contractors now. One
yeah, with the
contractor for
circulator,
ADA.
right?
Yes. Mhm.
So is it the same contractor for Metro Mobility and for the fixed routes, the regular
Yes.
fixed routes? It's the same
No,
contractor.
well, no. So Transdev is the operator for the ADA paratransit service and the contractor for the downtown shuttle service. There's another different contractor that does the balance of our fixed route service.
The fixed routes, like the main, all the fixed routes throughout the city.
Right.
Okay, when's that contract up?
I'm not sure. I think they're in, we just executed an option year.
Well, that might be a way, and looking in that contract to make sure that they provide what the necessary salaries or wages or whatever it is to get more bus drivers.
Yeah.
So I'd be curious to know when that contract, if it's going through negotiations right now to see if we could beat that up so that we could come up to.
Yeah,
know,
well, in the
okay.
past several months, we've already negotiated with them. They are offering higher wages than they were just a couple months ago. So they have seen an increase already, which has helped with attracting more operators. It's helped with recruitment.
Yeah, but to the degree that this circulator is.
Are they offering about the same wages?
Comparable, yeah. Very
Comparable?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. All right. No, I didn't want to put you on the hot seat, Brian, but I just had these burning
But you did.
questions.
That's okay.
Okay, because I know that you do all that you can do and you do a really good job at it. So I just wanted to
Sure.
put that out
Thank
there.
you.
All
We're
right.
just trying to make you Miss Craig today. Go ahead.
Yeah, do you draw from a regular pool of bus drivers, or each contractor had to go through their own training pool?
They
drivers?
have their own HR folks that do their recruiting and their training. Yeah, once a recruiting class basically is formed, they put them through training. And if they don't already have their CDL, they can get their CDL as part of the training before they're put into service. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
As a different question, do you have to have a high school degree to apply?
A GED
Okay,
is allowable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
so we took away that requirement at our Department of Transportation and got a lot of people to apply.
Yeah, it's
So
helped. Yeah.
it's a thought.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay. There being no
Thank you.
other questions, we appreciate the report.
Appreciate it.
It's good to have you, Brian. Now, the Pprta 3 capital project list, and we're going to direct this to Rick, which do you want to start with, the 75% issue or the actual
please.
list?
Yes, please.
Okay,
In accordance with the board-approved timetable for the planned PPRTA 3 ballot measure for November 8 of this year, today is the board's second review of the capital project list from 6 member governments. The third review will be at the July 13 board meeting. The PPRTA staff wants to highlight an issue that came up at the PPRTA CAC meeting last Wednesday. And that is that both the City of Colorado Springs and El Paso County are requesting to use more than the 75% for the A list cutoff that the board approved at the board's January 12 meeting. If I have put at each of your places a 2-page handout with yellow highlight. And if I could take a minute on that, this is what was approved by the board in January. The board approved a Beverly's recommended revenue estimate. And then decided that 75%, if you look at the box at the top of the page, the last couple of lines, that the cutoff for the A list should be 75% of the total capital revenue estimate for PPRTA 3. For example, if you flip over to page 2, the top portion is the A list. So for example, City of Colorado Springs would receive $534 million. What Gail has recommended in her memo that's in your packet is to spend 572 million instead of the 534 that is the share that the board approved in January. So I'm not sure that the PPRTA staff cares strongly one way or the other about holding to the 75% or increasing it to 80.2 in the city's request, or 83% in the county's request. But I think there needs to be some discussion about the pros and cons about holding to the 75% or increasing it to 80.2 or 83%. And then whatever the board decides, that particularly if the board decides to increase the cutoff between the A list and the B list, then that percentage should be applied to all 6 member governments. So I'd request a discussion on that. I understand there's also a citizen in the audience who wants to address the board on this issue. So I'll leave it at that. And Madam Chair, you can decide which, whether you want to take the presentation from the citizen, or you want there to be discussion on the 75% rule first.
Okay, if I'm correct, the citizens are here to discuss specifically the Colorado Springs proposed projects. So what's happened is both El Paso, we approved in the board because as the ballot language reads, you must have all of the A-list projects funded. I don't know exactly how we word the language there before you start doing the B-list projects. And so we agreed that in our revenue estimation, we would have 75%, and El Paso County and the city of Colorado Springs are at 82 and 83%, which means we need to come up, essentially we either need to cut something out of the city needs to cut something and the county needs to cut something, or we need to increase. One or the other. So I need some opinions on this. Go ahead, Councilmember Williams.
Thanks. Yeah, I think the critical factor is we need to be using similar numbers. And it's a question of how much specificity can you provide to the voters. There, at least, and I'll let, as folks go through and we evaluate these, kind of, are there enough needs that you're sure of that all of these projects in the A list need to be done? And if so, there's at least a reasonable argument that providing voters more specificity is better, so they know what they're getting. So that's one aspect. Are we sure? Are we confident that this is still going to need to be done 8 years from now? And I will tell you that at least as I've looked at a number of the projects, I can't say that I've gone through that analysis on every one. I can't conceive of a concept that where you don't need Mark Shuffle widened consistently to 4 lanes. To just pick a joint city county project that's pretty critical. For a lot of these others, I think it's clear that some of these things need to be done, and I don't see that changing. Second question is, in addition to that, are we confident there will be enough money to get these projects done? Right, because that's the other part, is we have consistently funded every A-list project in RTA 1. That's why I asked the questions in the revised budget for RTA 2. If we were not in a situation where we could do that, I would have a different response with respect to intersection improvements that are funding some of the projects, but city's confident we can get it done. County's confident they can get it done. We've used a reasonably conservative revenue estimate. It's not the most conservative that you could possibly come up with, but it projects a recession in those revenue forecasts. And I will say that, do I feel confident that at least 80% of the money will come in that we're projecting, or 85%? I feel confident 90% at least will come in. So I don't think we're pushing the edge on any of that. We've seen, while there is volatility in sales tax, I don't see our community significantly losing population or revenue. And I don't see people stopping to buy things. Now, at one point in the RTA discussions, I was concerned because people would divert to buying things online and we would lose the sales tax for those dollars, but that's no longer the case. So I'm open to looking at a different number other than that 75%, as long as we are consistent with where we are. I think for several of the entities, we're going to do some paving. And so that one doesn't really matter then, whether we use the 85%, you're doing some paving in Rama, and if you do 75%, you're doing some paving in Rama. There's a certain amount of predicting you can do, and the difference in the large projects is we have to be able to say, yes, we're going to be able to complete them. And so those are the two questions. And then whatever it is, I guess I'd like to hear from the city and the county as to whether they believe that we should really be at an 82, 83% level, and why they chose to go with that route, because I'm open to that, because I think the projects are ones that need to be done for the most part, and there may be some tweaking on those, and we may hear some public comment on those, I anticipate. And I feel confident that there is sufficient money that if we went at 85%, we would still be able to get done what's there, because we've not been wildly optimistic. We've used solid revenue projections, and I believe our economy will continue to grow and our population will continue to grow. In terms of what prices do, the advantage of being tied to sales tax is that as prices increase, then our revenues increase along with them. So we tend to stay reasonably consistent with price and revenue increases. So those are a few of my thoughts, but I'd be wondering if the city and county be willing to tell us why, when we said 75, did you come back at 82 or 83?
And here's just a side question too. So if we went to 83 or 85% and Manitou gets done with its A-list projects, are they able to then move something up from their B-list? Or do we have to wait till? No. Okay.
That's the answer is no, but I think all of the smaller entities' projects were sufficiently broad that they could use funds within that. If I remember looking at each of their lists, and I'll let them respond to that.
Yeah, if I could respond to that. Yeah, I know in the case of Manitou, there is, as you would say, sufficiently broad description or criteria to where I don't think this is really a pragmatic problem for us. whether it's 75, 80, 85, it's not going to affect how we execute our, to our needs. So I don't, from my perspective, I mean, I would still like to hear the city of Colorado Springs and the county's rationale for it, but I don't think it's going to be a problem from our perspective, from manager's perspective.
Okay, and then while Gail's getting ready to start with the city's perspective, and we will get to citizen comment, I promise. A couple things to realize here is that this is our volume and capacity building measure. PPACG's hands are going to be tied a lot now with the new greenhouse gas regulations. So that's one thing to consider as well. And I will come up with the second one here in a minute. Go ahead, Gail.
All right, I'm going to try just to address the issue of trying to come up to have our projects land on that 75%. We made great strides towards getting towards that number. If you recall, we started off with a unconstrained project list, and now we've narrowed it down to 23 projects. And we've really looked at them and felt like those were a wide range of the right kind of projects to address the infrastructure needs within our community. Unfortunately, they don't fit nice and squarely in that 75% block. So we still try to look at reducing some scope items, which we did look at on the Woodman Road project. We looked at trading off projects, what may make most sense to get it above the A-list line. But I will tell you that within our projects, on every one of these construction cost estimates, we were carrying between 20 and 50% contingency based on the quality of the estimate and our relative level of certainty and review of the risk analysis performed for each of the projects. So there is some contingency built in there. So I want you to be cognizant of that. But we did not, one of the things as I went back and was looking at them to address this question, and even as we're starting to refine the list, is there are some projects where we have not been really able to recognize all the cost reimbursement we would receive from Colorado Springs utilities. So we picked those up where it was clear that it was a 50-50 split between the city and utilities. There are other areas where that's not as clear. So I feel like there's likely other cost reimbursements we're going to capture. The second thing is some of these projects on here, we do have some grant money. We are concerned about the state of that grant money in the future. But we feel like regardless, even with the body of projects, there's going to be the ability to come capture some other grants that are going to help us deliver. So I would say that if I were to go back and refine them, I could make the numbers come up exactly at 75% by adjusting the contingency, by taking more estimated reimbursement either through funds from Colorado Springs Utilities or grants. But I was really trying to stay with a very similar methodology on all of them, as opposed to honestly fudging the numbers to fit in the box. And I felt like it was important for us to come and have a candid discussion about how things fit related to the overall projected revenue. At least that's how the city looked at it. I don't know if the county's perspective is different, so I'll let Josh answer.
I would echo just about everything that Gail said, and I appreciate that because their approach was pretty much the approach that we took. It's difficult to go through and to try to cut projects, right? Because there's so much that we need to do. And we may get to this, but if you look at our list, there's 2 projects specifically that we really wanted to make sure that we could get on the A list and ensure, this is a mechanism to make sure those projects are done first. One of them being Woodman and the other one being Eastonville, and 2 significant corridors in El Paso County we wanted to address. Like Gail said, we could go through and we spent a lot of time, and staff spent a lot of time revising scopes, adjusting limits of projects, working with the city on joint projects and combining projects. But rather, like Gail said, rather than changing numbers for our estimates, we decided that it may be a better approach to be true to the numbers and our estimates and request consideration or discussion to increase our planning percentage from 75, so that the 83% does come from El Paso County, to bump those 2 projects up from what would end up being the B list to the A list.
Okay, and if I'm correct, these lists have gone through the governing bodies. So El Paso County has approved its list, or at least the HAC has, I know that. the Highway Advisory Commission, because there is the additional complication that to change the list, you would have to go back in front of city councils. It's probably easier to add in than to take away.
And that's true on our part. Yeah, we have, we've gone to a highway advisory committee, but not to the Board of County Commissioners yet.
Yes, so I guess I'm probably fine entertaining a motion for if we go up to 85%. Does anyone have any objections to that?
If I could, I'd just like to point out real quick that the HAC did approve the recommendation for the 83%. So we presented that request to them as well, and they approved the recommendation for that.
And I had CTAB approved theirs too, I think.
That is correct, Madam Chair.
Okay. Mr. Williams.
No one's above 83, right? Okay, so I move that we adjust the placeholder from 75% to 83%. And entities can make adjustments as necessary to meet that. But I think that gets us there with a minimum and also provides voters more certainty in terms of what's going to be done.
I'll second that.
Okay.
John Graham.
Councilmember Avila, did you have a question or just?
I was going to second, but.
Okay. All
I'll
right.
just Say aye.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that matter is resolved. So now, go ahead, Rick.
So that means Bev will send out revised estimates to all 6-member governments showing their new shares at the 83%. And so member governments might be revising their capital list again for the July CACNA board cycles.
Okay, so that's a little bit more sidewalk in Calhan. Okay, so we do have, first of all, let's have Gail introduce the City of Colorado Springs list, and then we'll allow our public comment to come up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The city did submit their draft project list in 2 forms, in a simple form and then in a more detailed form showing an estimated cost, planning cost, and a brief description. I will point out you also have 2 memorandums that come with your list because I revised it since we had to meet the submission deadline. So the top memo in your package is the one I'm going to be addressing that talks about changes that the city would be proposing on the list as presented as we work towards the fiscal constraints and also looking at some things that we've learned that are different from when we presented the list a few weeks ago. The first is to move the construction of the Fillmore Street bridges from the AB list up to the A list. We had that split in what was presented in your packet with the engineering in the A list and the construction dollars in the AB list. The reason for this change, we've been going through a lot of technical analysis. We've been very concerned about the structural stability of that bridge. We've had some experts come and take a look at it as well. And I feel like even with the maintenance efforts we have planned for this year, we're going to need to proceed with the replacement here in the next 10 to 12 year cycle. And so that moved that project up. Also with the Woodman Road, previously we had it scribed from Black Forest Road to US 24. We want to change that description from Powers to US 24, which is consistent with Connect COS. And the reason why we had different termini in the past, because we currently have STP Metro funds identified in fiscal years 25, 6, and 7 for the engineering work for that project, and then the first phase of construction. And then looking at some of the greenhouse gas regulations, and there's just concerns about the funding and the years that funding lie that we may not be able to keep that funding on that particular project. Not saying we're losing that money from a community standpoint, but we may not be able to keep it applied to that project. And in discussions with the county, we feel like obviously addressing our needs that were identified by both of our transportation planning studies to address capacity and safety issues on the Woodman Road corridor. So we moved that up. We know we've discussed this with the board. It's moved back and forth between the A, B, and AB lists in the past, but feel like it's important for us to put it on the A list so we have options. As I mentioned previously, when we were discussing the cost estimates, we're still trying to hope to capture federal funding for that project. And if so, that would leave more revenue to address other projects, both on the A list and on the B list for the city's portion. So with those changes, moving those up, a couple of things moved down. The first one is the Mark Shuffle Road Bridge over Cottonwood Creek. That is a planned future, Mark Shuffle Road is planned to continue north. It already go north of Woodman Road and eventually be tying into research. That bridge does have some development responsibility, but we felt like we were going to be doing a trade-off, but unfortunately, just to meet the fiscal constraints, that bridge right now is dropped to the B list. The Old Ranch Road, Voyager Parkway to Lexington Drive, there's a segment in there that between at least Voyager and Kettle Creek, it goes back and forth between the city and a county jurisdiction, but we feel like that there's some pending safety and capacity issues in there. Unfortunately, the reason why this dropped, even though it was identified as a priority for improvements, if you lived in that area, whether it's Pine Creek, the Kettle Creek area, you now have other options to have egress from those neighborhoods, as opposed to just relying on Old Ranch Road, which used to be the only way back into Pine Creek when it first started development. But with the Milam Union connection at Old Ranch Road, with the signals put in Chapel Hills, I was going to say Chapel Hills Drive, it's not the new signal near Pine Creek High School. There's just other egress routes to get in and out of that. So that one dropped in priority, even though it's still a need. Through Connect COS and the Corridor Avenue Planning Study, one of the projects identified there is the Platte Avenue Widening and Shared Youth Path project from Shelton to Powers. We still think that's an important project for us to consider, but unfortunately, as we went through the list, that the engineering portion of that did drop to the B list, and the construction dollars were always planned in the B list. And the last one are the Woodman Road multimodal improvements between Orchard Valley Road to Rock Rimmon. We are going to do some minor addressing of some of the issues on Woodman Road with some 2C efforts that are planned later this year. But the bigger project that we would like to see, we did drop to the B list at this point.
All right. Any questions just for that? Okay, so now we have, I know we have Dutch Schultz from the Old North End. Let's go ahead if we can open up to some citizen comment.
I wonder if we can lead off. Diane Bridges is on that line, and she would speak for the historic neighborhood partnership.
Absolutely. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the board. My name is Diane Bridges, and I'm the chair of an organization called the Historic Neighborhoods Partnership. And, you know, we're just a group of neighborhoods, about 15 neighborhoods, some voting members, some participants, all volunteers. And so I have a short statement I'd like to make. And before I do that, I do want to say thank you. Thank you to this board, and thank you to the city public works and traffic engineering staff. You know, we've been working a bit with Travis and Gail and others, and really do appreciate your efforts and focus, because obviously, you know, the city does need investment in transportation, and we appreciate the complexities in developing a 10-year plan for that. Just a lot of work being done in a very short period of time. So thank you. So having said that, there are some concerns that I keep hearing, you know, from representatives in these 15 different neighborhoods that I work with. And I just want to succinctly summarize. These concerns evolve around two key themes. The first theme is, in some cases, there's a feeling that there's insufficient clarity, lack of details, and, and a vagueness, especially in some high value projects. So not much detail, just a lot of money that we'll be voting on. That's number one. Number two, there's a general feeling there hasn't been sufficient vetting with the general public on some of the initiatives. The process, again, I'm expressing a feeling, was rushed, not complete enough where the public has the opportunity to provide review and comment. And some of the examples of what I'm referring to here include the Colorado Avenue initiatives, Platte Avenue, Constitution, and some element of the transit programs. And so, the result in this, I'm just telling you what I'm hearing is there's a feeling of, a little bit of lack of transparency, and it caused trust issues. And it just may jeopardize the ballot issue. And we don't want that. Nobody wants that. And so there's a few citizens that are here today that would like to amplify on specific concerns on certain initiatives. And we just want to speak up now because we hope that collectively we can do whatever action to address them. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. On those issues, so I've circled the projects. We've got a couple Colorado Avenue ones, the Constitution Avenue feasibility study. Is that just a study is what we're proposing?
That's correct. It's a feasibility study and I've had some discussions with folks on that recently, but I think it may be important to describe that feasibility study would really be kind of a two-part effort. The first part would be an initial technical go, no go. And the second part would be more in-depth technical review, but a lot of public engagement would be involved in this. This is a feasibility study early on effort to go through and look at it, but it was a recommendation that came out of the city's transportation master plan study. I have to say though, in talking with some citizens that were very adamantly opposed to what was referred to the Constitution Avenue extension in the past circa 2000, 2001 timeframe, what we're talking about is very different. And I didn't really put that together until I've talked with former Councilwoman Radford and with CAC member Rick Hoover. And what was presented back at the time, as they both have described it to me, was more of a freeway-esque type effort that would go from basically the Fontanero off-ramp to Powers Boulevard. And it would have had significant impacts to existing neighborhoods as going through. So it was really interesting to kind of hear that's very different than what we're talking about today. We're talking about looking to see if it's even feasible to do this connection. And if we can do it from a technical standpoint, what makes the most sense to go through that area. And really the intent would be to, again, tie in with that Fontanero exit, likely use the city's property or what's currently the city's, we have both Colorado Springs Utilities and City Yard there, and tie into a right of way that exists that parallels the Rock Island trail. And understand what they'd be. We're talking about a limited access roadway that would end at Union. And anything from Union to the east would remain as it is today. We would really only be focusing from I-25 to Union and see what made the most sense in that corridor. But again, it's a feasibility study. I'm going to have lots of public engagement for it if it was determined to be technically feasible at the first pass.
Okay, and then we can have someone come up here. The other one is the Platte Avenue. If you've had a chance to read about that, of one-waying Platte Avenue and one-waying Boulder. So go ahead, Council Member Williams, and then Gail.
Actually, I had a question for the presenter. So Diane, one of the things that, in terms of the general process for the Pikes Peak RTA, there have been public meetings for the last year. In terms of the projects, those come through the individual entities. And as you're probably aware, ballot issue in terms of the process needs to be complete really by July. And so are there specific things you are asking for in the process standpoint to address or alleviate your concerns? Because I understand the what you've just said, and now what I'm asking for is what's your proposed solution, or maybe some of your other people will be speaking to that.
So thank you for that question. Thank you for that. More specificity, if I may just say generically, with input from the public. We feel in the list of the initiatives that I just said that there's, for the amount of money that is currently estimated, we don't really fully understand what are we accomplishing. So from a process perspective, yes, there's been discussion. Some of the specifics or verbiage is fairly new. That coupled with the estimates is fairly new. That's what's prompting these questions at this later stage. So the specific concerns will be addressed by the others that will talk today. But hopefully I've answered your question. What is it that we would want from a process perspective is to have more specifics in writing on the ballot initiative so we know what are we getting for the money.
Okay, so let me follow up on that if I could, Diane. So there's two different places where projects are specified. One are in the supporting documents and one are in the actual ballot question. And as you're probably aware from having seen past Pikes Peak RTA ballot questions, the list on the ballot tends to be much shorter than the backup in there by necessity, because otherwise, and so I think that is something that we should be able to accomplish. And I'd ask, at least on behalf of the city, if we could work on providing some of that greater specificity. And then I don't know if any of the ones you raised were county questions, but I think in terms of large projects, we do want to have a little bit more than just Circle Road Drive or Platte Avenue. So, but I think we can do that. And I think that's a reasonable request. We can't necessarily address every possible permutation. And I'll give you an example from Pikes Peak RTA too. The city had planned for a bridge for Academy Boulevard, if I'm remembering right, over Cottonwood Creek. We thought it would be a box culvert. When we got into the actual design process, it needed to be an actual bridge. And so there are times when you get into the project that it may alter somewhat, but I do think we can at least give some specificity, just like Gail did with respect to the feasibility study. So I think we can work on that.
Yeah, thank you for that. And we do recognize, actually, we're working with Travis on, on one initiative on the specifics in the language. So thank you for acknowledging that. In other cases, we just want to better understand the basis of the estimate, and we would welcome the partnership with the city to work on that.
Okay, let's go ahead and have someone come up. And I know on the basis of the estimates, we did contract out with several engineering firms to have them help us walk through the estimates so that we could get a reasonable estimate of what something might cost. Of course, this will be over a period of 10 years, so things could increase. And now we have Dutch. Go ahead, Dutch.
Hi, I'm Dr. Schultz, president of the Old North Bend neighborhood. I have two issue projects that are on. One that I'm suggesting we move up in priority, and one that we move down or possibly eliminate. Let me talk about the one that's one address going up. It's on page 6 of 9, project 158. It's the Nevada Roadway Safety Study on 6 of 9. is what I'm looking at. This may sound like special pleading in that it goes through the north end. But it's not, because the number one criteria that was used throughout the study, and we kept careful track of everything, was safety. Anytime there was a safety issue, that gave a high priority. So how did this project fall through the crack? Well, the underlying criteria was safety measured by intersection accidents. T-boning, intersections result in T-boning, which are more hazardous than just fender benders. In the Old North End, we only have on Nevada Avenue one intersection of an arterial with another arterial. And that's Fontanero, which basically dead ends almost into Penrose Hospital. So there's not a lot of cross traffic. People are turning right or left. Yet on Nevada Avenue, for a mile stretch, we have a high number of accidents because it has become a speedway. And some of them are deadly. We have deaths on the straightaway. If you had a chance to look at today's newspaper, the Gazette, down at the bottom about the Kansas two-step, I had to laugh when I read that, because the two gentlemen who initially got arrested were going 14 miles over the speed limit on I-70. 14 miles over the speed limit is almost exactly what people do on Nevada Avenue every day. We've measured it. We know that they are exceeding the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit by 13 miles an hour. And that's an average. The real killer is the people doing the high velocity. And this study is to how to reduce that. And it's fallen through the crack because the criteria was used about intersection accidents, not generalized accidents. So I'm here asking you today to move it up. Now, it's been in the works for 10 years. We've been trying to get this study done. And it's always not quite made the cut. And so I'm asking you administrative, first of all, it's only, and it's hard to say this, only 600,000, but it's not the millions. It won't reject other programs if it's moved up, if you follow my logic. Okay. If you want discussion right now, I'm more than willing to do that before I go on to the other item.
Mr. Williams.
I just tell you that that's not unusual, that there's been a need for a long time. The Briargate Stapleton connection was on RTA 1 and RTA 2, so it's been around for at least 20 years. So I'm not saying that's not a concern, but I'm also saying the needs greatly outweigh the funds. And so.
Absolutely, and I'll address that on the next project.
Excellent. Thanks, Dutch.
Okay. Any other questions on that one? All right, go ahead.
The other project that I'm concerned about does not have a need. In fact, it's the only project in the entire list that you have that is not need driven. And that is item, let me just pull up. Well, it doesn't have an item number. It's the transit enhancement. There are 3 corridors that were lumped together in transit enhancement. Basically the BRT. Now, El Paso County is going to have a BRT. The state's more or less mandated that. And it's important that they be very successful. And there are 3 candidates who are thrown in here, and they're all equally presented. And they are not equal. 2 of them have great needs for people who are using them to commute to their jobs. They are called captured riders, meaning they don't have an alternative to get to work. That corridor is on South Academy. That's one of them. And the other one is Platt Avenue. Those 2 projects are in great need of the BRT. The third corridor, which is listed there, is the Weber to North Nevada Renewal Area, BRT. They don't currently have riderships. That doesn't exist. Think of the dog track. Is anybody trying to get to or from the dog track to downtown? It's based on speculation. Build the BRT and they will come. Not another project that you have put on the list is to help developers do something. It's for people, safety project, move them. You have a great need, and yet they're put in a funny way. Initially, these three transit enhancement were listed separately. And then when the objections came in and it was pointed out that the Weber, Nevada one was not needed, they were mushed together. So the vote, we will not know which one is a priority, which one it gets. And by the way, they're expensive. And if you do the Weber, Nevada one, if you leave it in and it gets funded, there will be a huge problem. And that's called the operating expense. The feds pay 90% of your capital expense and 0 of your operating expense. If you lay an egg on this project, you're going to run into an operating cost that Mountain Metro will have to cut services in other areas because they can't operate on a negative. They have to meet their operating costs. So I'm asking not to allow that specific project, Weber, Nevada, to be lumped in with the other two. The other two have great needs. Any questions?
Seeing no questions, let's move on to our next speaker. Thank you. Commissioner, City Council member and friend, Sally Clark.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of the PPRTA board. My name is Sally Clark, and I'm here speaking on behalf as just a citizen who lives on the west side and has been very involved in the Midland Corridor project and subsequent meetings that have taken place on those. So I point out 60, I guess the numbers are 64B and 64A. There's also a trail component in a separate line item, but I'm not here to address that. I think we're in pretty much agreement on the trail. One of the things that I wanted to bring up, first of all, thank you for serving. I did sit on this board for quite a few times, and I certainly was part of the original PPRTA that went on the ballot in 2004, which was successful, is why we're here today. And it's important, I'm not here to oppose any projects. I want to let you know. However, that being said, I think it is important, as Diane pointed out, and my husband and I are members of the Historic Neighborhoods Partnership, that voices are heard with regard to some of the wording and the details. Devil is in the details, as is said. If you look at 64A, I think one of the things, and 64B, that is on page 1 of 9, those specifically outline traffic calming on arterial streets. That is probably the most controversial piece of these two projects. I requested from the city, and I know that Gail was on that email chain, more specifics of how the 10.8 million was derived. It's an expensive price tag, and we're all concerned about how that number was derived. And Madam Chairman, you mentioned that there was an engineering firm that helped with the cost estimates. I did request more details, but I really was not provided with anything. So I think it would be very helpful to basically know how those estimates were derived from that engineering firm. One of the things that I think could sync the, the projects is, again, when you start traffic calming on one street, the traffic doesn't stop, it just goes somewhere else. And so are we going to be shoving them into neighborhoods that are less, where there's less traffic than Colorado Avenue? And I don't think that anyone on the west side is really I think concert together saying that we're either for or against. Some are for, some are against, some concern bike lanes, others are parking issues. We are very much in favor of looking to solve the problems. However, we're a little bit concerned as what the arterial traffic calming will involve and engage. And Colorado Avenue, as if any of you have, probably a lot of you drive it on a pretty regular basis, especially if you're going to Manitou Springs, making sure that you use peak traffic numbers it's really important, because while you can average it out, averages hide what actually goes on in areas like Old Colorado City and along Colorado Avenue. I am not suggesting taking this off the list. I am just basically saying we would like to see more details in terms of what that traffic calming means. I did get an email back from the city that said basically that the traffic calming portion will be further vetted in the West Side study and will include consideration of the lane reduction through Old Colorado City as presented at the last public meeting. However, that is not specifically outlined. So however I may obtain that information, I think that would help those of us on the west side who are concerned about that. And so we can really engage the folks that will be primarily affected. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
I don't think there's any questions. As far as the estimates, this isn't actually a design build. And Mr. Williams has a comment here. It's not exactly designing it. It's just, we had him look at it.
Yeah, the estimate right now is assuming the total project cost, so not just the construction cost, but the engineering costs, the utility investigation, and if there's any compensation that has to happen from a right-of-way perspective. And if there's any utility changes, then we do carry a contingency, as I mentioned earlier, between 20 and 50%. And Ms. Clark is right. This was one study that, there is a study that's going on for this. It's the Midland Corridor study. And I want to talk about something just in general. And I understand the need for more specifics. We all want more specifics on our projects. But when you look at a project life cycle, most of these are coming from a initial planning effort. And my planning friends are going to hate me, but it's almost like the good idea fairies. And I don't mean to make that sound negative, but they're looking at the range of opportunities that are to improve transportation in there. And sometimes we can't provide the specifics until we take that next step and we actually have a project. We start refining concept designs and get into preliminary engineering to see what the technical feasibilities are. And then with that, that's when the stakeholders are further engaged. So all these projects have additional stakeholder engagement planned in them. So I think that's important. So unfortunately, though, where we are, we don't necessarily have more specifics yet.
Sure.
We know there needs to be an addressed issue in the area.
Okay. And Wayne.
Two questions. Let me do a follow-up. So Sally referenced a reference to a past meeting and wanted to get, if I remember hearing correctly, with respect to the potential for a lane reduction. Were there materials from that meeting that we can provide to her?
I think likely. I know that Ms. Clark reached out and spoke with Tim Roberts, who is the project manager for the Midland Trail Corridor. There have been several public meetings that showed potential concepts in that area. And I believe it's the area between 28th and 21st Street, I think in particular, that she's got the most concerns about, where they are talking about repurposing that right of way and actually pulling up the curbs, I believe is what the concept showed, to provide more sidewalk area and change how the parking's configured at narrowing the lanes in that area to provide, to reduce speeds in that area. But again, it is a recommendation that's coming from that study. We won't know till we get into the technical feasibility, what that looks like. So I don't know what she's been provided other than this email string back and forth just today.
Okay, so if you can work to make sure that she gets copies of those concepts that have been presented, I'd appreciate that. And then let me follow up on the broader issue that Gail talked about. There are, what, 9 pages of potential projects. And so, no, they've not all been scoped out in every specificity that people may want, because in order to get that, we had to choose which ones we want to elevate to this list. And so there will be a public process on those. And that's part of what has to take place, but we haven't done that on every project yet, because some of them aren't going to get funded in this or perhaps the next 2 or 3 RTAs. So it wouldn't make a lot of sense to go through a long process on each, but those that are funded will go through a process, particularly where you're talking about the impacts on Old Colorado City merchants, on those that are affected by that, those that commute through. And so this will be an important one to have that engagement on. And I think you've heard Gail's commitment that will take place going forward. But in the meantime, we should be able to get you any documents that have been presented at a public meeting.
If I might, Madam Chair. So I have the Midland Corridor study, which is actually online. There were quite a few virtual meetings, just one in person wasn't, I mean, it was well attended down at City Hall, but we really haven't had a whole lot. I mean, COVID changed our whole lives. And I think we're looking forward to more in-person meetings that are not just over Microsoft Teams or Zoom or however we do those. The one thing that would help, I think, to assure those of us that are engaged in a lot of these projects is what is the public process that will take place as these plans are flushed out. Because I think when you just say reconstruct, that just says, okay, we're done, let's move on. And the position is, I would like to know what the future process is so that everyone is engaged and we come up with a plan that everybody is, or at least most everyone is satisfied with. So it doesn't end up as a problem later on for you.
Right. No, I appreciate that. And our goal with all of our projects is when you start that public process in the end, that you have an informed consent, right? That everyone has been involved in the process, provide input, and it gets taken in consideration when we go through and move forward with the process. So that's duly noted. And we'll try to provide some more specifics on what process to be, not just for the West Colorado projects to see on here, but I think that's going to be important for Platte, which I'm going to want to address later, because I think there's even Madam Chair doesn't know what the project is right now. I can tell from her statements.
I simplified it way down.
No, that's actually, because that's not actually the project. That's the that's the issue. But anyway, just to make sure it's specific, though the public knows in general with all of our projects, so we're working with some kind of public engagement piece before we proceed. So we'll work on being able to define that.
And I know there have been a lot of open houses, but I will be honest that the public doesn't really feel engaged with open houses because it's basically a controlled atmosphere where you can't do Q&A. So it's, I think, it's not as advantageous as, and maybe as we move out of the remote type of virtual atmosphere, those will be more possible to engage the public more, not just one-on-one in an open house where you're wandering around, but more in a presentation method. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you for your service.
We've got another one. Okay, go ahead. Tell us your name first.
Yes, I'm Louise Connor. I'm currently Vice President and past President of the Middle Shooks Run Neighborhood Association. We're just east of downtown. And so our association includes people who live from Institute Street to Wasatch. Our neighborhood will be affected by implementation of project number 121. It's on page 3 of 9. It's the description says implement road enhancements identified by the Platte Avenue Corridor Study. It's tagged at $55 million plus. And I'd like to speak to the lack of clarity and details for this project, which have led to confusion and consternation among my neighbors. You may have read or heard about it in the Gazette or on a television news report. When it was first presented, there were two options considered that would go through my neighborhood for Platt Avenue and Boulder. Only a month ago, we were informed of the decision to go with the one-way couplet with no explanation. And this one-way couplet will have significant impact on my neighborhood, not the least of which is constraining access to Memorial Hospital and to Columbia Elementary School. But it will also drastically change the character of this neighborhood by removing the historic medians on Platt Avenue. 100 years ago, the adjacent property owners voted to share the cost 50-50 with the city to pay for the medians. And now the proposal is to remove the trees, grass, and medians and replace it with asphalt. We're not terribly happy about that. We've had some open houses in the past few weeks. None of them have been in my neighborhood. The last one was last night, many miles away from our neighborhood. And I agree with Sally, the open houses are not the same as public meetings. They don't provide opportunity for people to raise concerns and hear the answers. We participated in Zoom meetings held where most of the time was spent by project planners explaining the goals of the project, but little discussion of the details and no in-person meetings. As a result, many neighbors are upset with no place to go. So our neighborhood association has provided a venue for that discussion to happen, and it will be tomorrow night in our neighborhood. But you're here today and you're voting on which projects are going on this list. And I realize that the city has said, well, there's still options. We can still discuss it. We can still talk about it. But the lack of details, the insufficient process, the rush to get this on the ballot, for me, it jeopardizes the credibility of the whole PPRTA project. So that's my spiel. Thank you.
All right, Gail, this looks like it's your chance to straighten me out on what I said about Platt Avenue.
Well, are there going to be more speakers? Because I think there's things that came from the first two speakers that need to be addressed as well. And I've been trying to keep copious notes to make sure that I can address everything.
We have one online, Mr. Michael Anderson.
Okay. And then I'll try to go through all of them if you don't mind at that time.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just ask, I'm welcome to hear Michael, but we've been going for more than 2 hours, so it'd be good to take a comfort break. That'd give Gail time to kind of formulate her thoughts as well.
Okay. Are we all okay? We'll take a comfort break for 7 minutes. We'll see y'all back here.
No, let Mike.
Oh,
let
Michael
Mike
go first.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
That way she can get all of the comments. and then
Okay.
she gets ready.
All right, Mr. Anderson, go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. My name is Mike Anderson, and I'm also a member of the Historic Neighborhoods Partnership. I have a few comments regarding project number 105 on the city's list. That's labeled Constitution Avenue Feasibility Study, I-25 to Union. And I'm also here to provide a few wrap-up comments regarding the concerns that the Historic Neighborhoods Partnership folks have shared with you today regarding the PPRTA list that's before you. A little bit about the Constitution project. You know, the project first appeared to have had its origins with the city's yet to be completed Connect COS process that, you know, has not been discussed today. Apparently that process is still ongoing, and it's our understanding it probably won't be until towards the end of the year that the Connect COS plan goes to City Council for adoption, and that would be well after the November PPRTA election. But the Constitution project first showed up on the city's, they called them Critical Corridors Portraits document. It wasn't even really a study, it was a bunch of graphics. And the study was entitled Constitution Avenue Feasibility Study. And oddly, it was listed as part of the Fillmore Transportation Corridor Portrait. So we found it in the document because we were paying careful attention to the document, but it made no mention of the fact that there was going to be an extension of Constitution from Union to I-25. And, as has already been discussed today, the last time this was proposed 20 years ago, and indeed it was a little different in that it was a freeway that extended all the way to Powers Boulevard. But those of us who have the scars from 20 years ago, and there are several I know in the audience today that have those scars, it was probably one of the most controversial and contentious matters that the Colorado Springs City Council has probably dealt with in at least 1 or 2 generations. But we subsequently learned at last week's CAC meeting that all of the regional transportation computer modeling used in developing the list of Connect COS projects and the project list that's before you today assumed that the Constitution extension would occur. So without the Constitution extension, an unknown portion of that regional transportation modeling and planning for Connect COS may not be valid. But the assumption had been made by the city staff as well as the Connect COS folks, we were informed. So that's the extension of Constitution, regardless of whether this is a feasibility study or whatever, but it appears that the extension of Constitution is a fait accompli in Connect COS and potentially in this Pprta 3 list. In other words, it appears the city staff have already determined that Constitution is going to go through, and the feasibility study, and I say feasibility parenthetically study, is actually merely the project planning for the Constitution extension. This was never publicly disclosed until we asked the question at last week's CAC, and the city's engineer and traffic folks, city's traffic folks verified that that was the fact. Now, we are surprised to hear today that Gail to say that the Constitution study would have a go, no-go component, but still that raises the logical issue of, and the technical issue of, well, if you've done all your transportation planning, assuming that that extension is going to occur, and I mean, we all know that that extension is going to be a big deal in terms of changing traffic patterns throughout the region. There's also a separate line item on the B list for implementation of the constitutional project. We recognize that large projects on the B list, they may get partially funded if there are additional revenues generated through the Pprta sales tax. But in all likelihood, we recognize that projects on the B list would be candidates for federal infrastructure dollars. Federal dollars that would be, we assume, allocated through PPACG and not the city council. One can easily envision a scenario in which the city council never really has to deal with the Constitution Avenue project in the future because they would not have to see any kind of approval of the project on a council agenda in the future. The project would rather be considered, and this is a big concern to us about the study being on the project list, is if federal dollars do become available and the study is either in process or has been completed, the project will be considered voter approved via Pprta 3. And would obviously make it impossible for anyone to oppose it going forward. The Constitution Extension project, even though it's different than what was proposed 20 years ago, from what we can tell, we don't know all the details. In fact, we know very few details other than what we've learned at recent CAC meetings. But the extension will likely have very direct and tangible impacts on the quality of life and livability of, we guess, thousands of residents in the Bonneville, Patty Jewett, Onan, Old North End, Roswell, and Constitution neighborhoods that are going to be seeing direct impacts. A cursory reconnaissance we did of the railway right-of-way and the route that we assume would be taken for the extension. There's probably at least, at a minimum, 450 houses and properties that would be directly impacted. Also of concern to the neighborhoods are on-off ramps on an extended Constitution. Are there going to be on-off ramps at Cascade or at Nevada or Weber? And what will the likely considerable impacts on traffic patterns be as a result of that? And there's roughly 4,000 homes in the old North End and the near North End that would be impacted by that. So there's a lot. I mean, even Gail had mentioned at last week's CAC meeting, and we weren't aware of this, but we've subsequently gone out and taken a look at it, that there's going to be implications for Horace Mann Middle School and Stratton Elementary Schools. In fact, when you just a visual, observation, there's not enough right-of-way to get past Horace Mann, so Horace Mann Middle School. So there's going to be a lot of implications there. I mean, there's a lot of issues associated with it, as well as Gail pointed out again today, as was discussed at the CAC last week. There could be some serious legal issues if the routing of Constitution has to cover has to go over or go through Monument Valley Park. Just so we all know, Parks advocates and the League of Women's Voters have repeatedly threatened to go back to court after they did in 1972 to stop an extension of the roadway, to litigate any taking of Monument Valley parkland. As our Parks advocates know, and the League of Women's Voters folks know, there are deed restrictions that were put in place by General Palmer on that park that if they are violated, it would provide cause for the Palmer heirs to seek reversion of all city parkland. So there's a lot of messy stuff. There's obviously noise and air quality impacts, all the stuff that we've talked about today. That would obviously put the word controversy all over this project. I mean, effectively, there is going to be considerable controversy given the breadth, scope, and the sheer number of directly impacted neighborhoods and neighbors that I just described. I think it would be a certainty that the PPRTA 3 ballot question will face some opposition this fall as a result of that. I think that probably would be the first time that's ever occurred in all of the past election efforts for the PPRTA. But I think the Constitution matter is something best handled by the Colorado Springs City Council and should not be something that is shifted over or pawned off on the PPRTA. And one option would be to remove this project from the PPRTA list, send it back to the city to handle it through its regular budgetary process. Once the proposal has been properly vetted with the public and affected neighborhoods, then consider spending $2.5 million of its own funds for the project. But if the project remains on the PPRTA list, I fear that it will not be without some considerable controversy in November. Just turning briefly to a few final comments regarding the concerns about transparency and sufficient vetting of the Colorado Springs project list that have been discussed and referred to today. Many of the projects on the list come from Connect COS. And as I think we all know, that is a major transportation planning process the city hasn't engaged in, I think, in two decades or 25 years. But it doesn't appear that project is anywhere near being complete. One of the most obvious, as Louise pointed out, is the $55.4 million Platt Avenue and Boulder Street improvements project between Wasatch and Circle. If we don't know what the project's going to be, how can the PPRTA with a straight face ask voters for $55.4 million, not knowing what the particulars of that project, at least I shouldn't even say the particulars, but the general characteristics of what that project is going to include. I know in the past that the PPRTA, its basic tenet and commitment has been to full transparency to taxpayers and voters. And that's something that, the PPRTA board has adhered to in the past. And we would certainly hope that that's something that would continue going forward. We believe the city's list has been rushed, hasn't been fully vetted with the public. And most importantly, this is the most important point, is that the Colorado Springs City Council has not yet considered or discussed in a public hearing format the city's list of $553 million of PPRTA 3 projects. That's before you today and will be for you next month for a final vote. We checked all the city council agendas since the beginning of this year, and they show that the first and only time the PPRTA ballot question and project list had been on a city council agenda was at the council's March 7th work session. And work sessions, I think it's important to note, the city council work sessions, the public's not allowed to speak. So only one time has the council even considered or heard the list. And in addition to that, our check of the PPRTA ballot question calendar you guys have developed, it doesn't appear there's any intent to send it back for any kind of final okie dokie of your member governments. Perhaps that's the case, and it just didn't show up on the calendar. So, you know, as I have said a couple of times here, I'll repeat it again. The city council has not had a public review discussion, or much less, you know, approve the list. But the city staff is asking the PPRTA board to approve the list for its November ballot question. So with that, I will. I'll shut up now because I know it's time for a break. But I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Let's take a 5-minute break and we'll see you back here. Oh, we'll come back at 4. Thank you. All right, let's come back to our seats because we want to get out of here by 4:44.
Madam Chair. Are you calling it to order?
They gave me a hammer for a reason.
Madam Chair, if I can.
Okay, I'm going to call this meeting back to order in 15 seconds.
Trying to show the people from the small jurisdictions can talk for a long time. Is that what you're trying to do?
Yep, that's what they're doing. I can tell you when I get impatient, I let everybody know. So we're ready to go. Call the meeting back to order. Mr. Williams, you have a comment?
Yeah, I do want to make a comment first, which is, and this is partially to guide Gail. I don't think, given that we have changed the percentage allocation from 75 to 83, I don't think it's appropriate to have us approve the capital project list because jurisdictions need time to look at that revision and make potential adjustments to that. So I guess I'll make it a formal motion just since it's listed as approved here. I think we still ought to have the discussion, but I don't think we're ready for an approval on it since we just changed the percentage a few minutes ago. So I would move that we delay approval of the actual capital project list until at least our June meeting. July meeting. July, that's right. So that may mean we're talking about it at the same time as we're talking about the final ballot language, but we can make that adjustment.
We have a motion on the floor, and before we have a second, we have an attorney comment.
I just wanted to clarify that it's co-listed as an approved / information item. happy to take a motion, but we contemplated that there may not be a final approval this month, given the timeline. So I don't know that the board needs to take action to defer it. Happy to have it on the record, but just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah.
And then since you also mentioned the timeline and it came up earlier, I'll just sneak in now that while our timeline has us finalizing the ballot in July, that by statute, we don't have to certify the ballot until September 9th. I know that that's not the desire of the board to wait until that last minute, but I just wanted to throw that out there since we've had some revisions here today.
So to clarify that we defer the approval for the capital project list to the July meeting. And I make that a motion just so it's clear what we've done.
I'll second. Chip.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Gail, did you want to give your speech in July or do you want to do it now?
No, I want the speech now.
Okay, all right. She's got about 4 pages, so we'll sit back and listen.
But let's have the vote on the motion.
Oh, okay. First of all, we'll have the vote on the motion. All in favor of deferring the final project list decision till July, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Okay, there's no one opposed. How much is our quorum, Rick? 6. Okay, everybody has to stay in their seats. Okay, go ahead, Gail.
Okay. All right. Madam Chair, Gail Servant, City of Colorado Springs. I'm going to try to lump these together with the 4 citizens that provided comment today by the 5 projects that were touched on specifically today, and then talk a little bit about overall process and commitments we can make. But first of all, I'd like to thank Diana and Dutch, Sally, Louise, and Mike for taking the time to be here today and representing the citizens, because they're obviously not representing their own interests, they're also representing their neighborhoods. So thank you for doing so. So first of all, I'm going to talk about the Colorado Avenue 2 projects. And there's actually 3, as Ms. Clark mentioned. Those projects are coming out as a result of the Midland Corridor study. But as a project begins, not only with the Colorado Corridor, but in the projects, they all have some public engagement. So we'll look to define that better, what that engagement looks like, where additional citizen input is. And again, our goal is always to reach informed consent on those projects and others as well. Dutch, and I apologize, I did not catch your last name. The North Nevada Safety Study. I actually heard him speak before. He's very passionate and I understand his concerns. We've talked about this internally, actually, a number of times about what we could do to help address the issues and concerns. If we were to proceed with a study, we could potentially do that with program funds when we looked at roadway safety. But I have to tell you, outside the study, one of the reasons why we moved it down to the B list is really because as traffic engineering is actually taking a look to see there's opportunities where we can do some traffic calming measures or other things to help provide safety in that corridor without going through the study as a whole. So we're already looking at ways to see if that we can implement solutions in that area. Some of the bigger solutions I know that I've heard presented before, like doing a total lane reduction through that portion of North Nevada, roughly between Uinta and Jackson Street. Right now, this is not really viable given the current traffic volumes. We could consider other traffic calming measures in the future if other portions of our network continue to be flushed out, but right now those don't exist. If things like the Nevada Weber transit connection come through and we did have enough people go to choice ridership, and traffic volumes were down on North Nevada, then potentially there's something more we could do beyond what traffic engineering is already looking at considering. But right now they're looking to implement what they can at this point. So the enhanced transit. So interestingly, and I don't remember who said this, and not that it matters, but the only specific corridor we had in consideration was the North Nevada Transit Corridor previously. And the reason being, and Brian, if you need to, he can step in and say some more. That was the one study or one of those 3 corridors that are currently named in our enhanced transit item that has a study already completed. The South Academy one's underway and Platte would follow. But whoever speaker brought that up, they're not wrong that the Platte and Academy ones have a higher ridership. And so as we looked at it and we understand the concerns, we really thought it would be better for us to put it together in a program to address all of our enhanced transit needs. And if you go and look at the description of the line item, it says those 3 corridors or other corridors as defined. So we're not saying that it's going to go to Nevada. We're not saying it's going to Academy or Platte or others design, but it gives us an opportunity. And we really designed that program to be able to go and capture outside funding, because doing implementation for enhanced corridor can have a large price tag. I will mention, I tend to shy away from the word BRT because we're not talking about, well, when I hear BRT, and I think when a lot of people hear BRT, they picture the articulated buses that were first implemented when BRT went in place. Our vision is not to have those articulated buses. We'd actually be looking at either low or zero emission vehicles that had 2 doors that were low floor, so you could have rapid on and off, on boarding and off boarding on the buses themselves, and still providing what may be more considered traditional with BRT, which is those enhanced stops, basically the kiosks, the informational that go along with it, but finding the best of both worlds to provide enhanced transit where we've got the reliability, the good head-to-head services and things like that. But really this was set up to go and capture grants to really start to implement these transit opportunities that are out there. And with the new infrastructure bill, there's several of them out there, but just to name a couple of new starts, small starts, and the capital investment grant. So it's specifically tailored to actually go and leverage the RTA dollars to get capture as much federal funding as we could and bring it back to our community to implement transit in a better way for our community. Okay, moving on to Constitution. So, and I'm not sure who Mr. Anderson spoke with. It was not me about the traffic modeling, but I did check with our traffic modelers while we were speaking. He mentioned that the recommendation was only based on traffic modeling with Constitution. It was actually modeled with and without Constitution. And when it's modeled, he is correct, and I have mentioned this previously, it does need to be looked at with Fillmore. So as you look at some of the east-west routes in the community, and particularly in that part of the middle section of Colorado Springs, and you look at traffic volumes, we do see an increase in demand. So the options become, do you widen Fillmore from a 4-lane road to a 6-lane road? If you guys have been on Fillmore a lot recently, you would understand that would have a very significant impact. Access to the businesses, and I mean, really, you would end up having enough where you probably have to buy out that most of that first row businesses along Fillmore Road. So the team did a second round of modeling that if you did do that that Constitution connection, does it provide the same traffic volume comparable to putting 6 lanes on Fillmore? And the answer was yes. And that's why they're recommending that we look at Constitution from a feasible standpoint to see if that helps with developing the city's overall network. One of the things that I mentioned last week at the CAC that I think is forgotten is that Centennial Boulevard is going to be connecting in at what's currently labeled the Fontenaro exit at I-25 today. We're talking about potentially extending from that connection and tying back in at Union and Constitution where it is today. With the modeling and what we envision, but again, it still needs to go through some vetting, is that it would be limited access. So I believe it was Mr. Anderson, but if I get that wrong, he did mention about, well, what happens to Nevada, I believe it was Nevada Cascade Weber. The intent right now is not really to connect to those roads. We're not intending to have ramps and direct connections to those. We're really trying to get traffic from what would, if it were to happen, likely be redevelopment right there at I-25 and again, what's currently Fontenaro, to the Union Constitution location where it's currently a 5-lane or 4-lane or 2 lanes in each direction and a 2-way center turn lane. So we don't envision that changing at all. In fact, that's why the project limit would stop at Union. Also, if you go and look at it, Mr. Anderson, I believe, pointed out, there are some technical challenges. You have the Rock Island Trail. We don't anticipate having any changes to the Rock Island Trail, but you also have the Van Buren Ditch, which goes along the area, and there are some grade changes. And that's one of the reasons why we need to do an initial technical go, no go to see if it is even still a viable option with just what's changed out there since it was looked at in any earnest. But from a traffic modeling standpoint, if you were to take and make that connection, it would provide relief in the east-west movements in the center part of Colorado Springs. And I believe it, Mr. Anderson had pointed out as well, why don't we go and figure out if it's a go, no go? First of all, a feasibility study is by definition is determine whether or not it's feasible or even viable to be able to go through and do that. And that's why we would envision as that was scoped, that would be in two steps, one doing that technical piece and the other part continue to flesh it out to show what it could look like. And that's where the engagement would take place. And last but not least, from a project standpoint, the Platte and Boulder improvements. So, and Madam Chair, I think you may have proved my point by what you said, that what's been talked about in the news is just one of the range of options that's been talking about. And I believe it was probably Louise, and I know there is going to be a neighborhood meeting tomorrow, that they refer to it as a transformational option, did show a one-way couplet. And it was presented at the public meetings that have come out for Platte Avenue, both virtually and in the last round of in-person public meetings, the first ones we've had in quite some time. But I wanted to point out is that the study is going to provide a recommendation with some range. We do have some things that are must-have on that corridor, at least on the Platte side. There are currently 4 bridges. Everyone, I think, recognizes there are 3. They may not realize there's the 4th one, but there are the 3 aerial bridges when you have the dip as you're heading westbound and approaching Wasatch. So one is the El Paso Street Bridge, which was struck by that truck last year and has been closed since that time. You have the Shooks Run Trail Bridge. You have the Return Road Bridge, and there's actually a 4th bridge is to the west. It's actually a culvert where Shooks Run itself goes underneath Platte Avenue. So why most people don't realize that there. Of those 4 bridges, 3 of them have condition issues that need to be addressed. Also, those retaining walls that are in that area are starting to show some structural deficiency, and they require some work as well. So when you go and look at whether you just replace those structures in place, or if you were to go and do this transformational option, all those costs actually end up being relatively same, because you still have to address this bridge in some fashion while you replace them. If you fill that area in, if you replace the walls, they all have a relatively similar price tag. So we've been carrying the same, that $55.4 million from a planning purpose with plan implementation. You got to remember, we're looking at construction dollars probably 7+ years in advance. So not only are we looking at today's dollars and all the total project costs, we're escalating those based on inflation. So I understand there's some issues because we've heard so much from the public about concerns, particularly those in the Middle Shooks Run and Nob Hill neighborhood. We are participating in the neighborhood meeting that's being organized tomorrow, but we've also made a commitment to have an in-person character workshop. So we had one virtually previously. This would be an in-person, and both these are designed to be interactive, where citizens can come in and meet with city staff and look at options or trade-offs within the public right-of-way, provide very specific input, and it's meant to be an interactive opportunity to provide input in that area. So we're working on getting that scheduled, anticipating that being in mid-July. And that would be focused specifically on addressing some of the concerns we've heard from the Middle Shooks Run and Nob Hill neighborhood. I will tell you, and I've been to all 6 of the recent open houses. Platte Avenue was discussed at all 6 of them, even though it was formally presented at the first 3 that were specific in those council districts that intersect with it. And it's interesting, I've heard for those manning the stations that the comments we're getting or the discussions we're getting range between 50-50 split or 60 against 40 with split on favorable, whether or not we did the one-way couplet or not. But I still think it's important for us to take this time to go through and do another round of engagement with the citizens in that area to determine what that could look like in the future. But in the end, the Platte Avenue corridor study is a study. They're going to provide recommendations. We think because of what we're hearing, we're likely end up going to have a range of recommendations, or really likely four. It's really just address the state of repair issues like the bridges that I mentioned, or incremental changes up to the transformational. And we feel like there's going to be a fourth one that lies in the middle between that incremental and transformational. And where that, just to give you an idea what that could look like, it could be fixing the repairs on Platte and potentially providing some enhancements on Boulder and leaving Platte functioning relatively the same as it does today. But regardless, with those recommendations, when that project starts, there will be additional engagement associated with that. I do want to just touch basis on process a little bit. With Pprta being a quasi-governmental entity, and please correct me if I state that wrong, Ms. Ivy, but the member governments bring the project list for the board's consideration. How that is dealt with in the city, we've actually gone through about 2 years of public process. It's kind of interesting that the 3 corridors that have had the most public process are the ones that we brought up today. But I understand, there's still more that we'll be doing. But what happens with that input, it's really this city's Citizens Transportation Advisory Board that provides a recommendation to City Council. They've been involved in this process, and they've done the scoring based on the 6 goals that were developed for the community. And then with that, as we've discussed in the past, we have to take those rankings that were done both by the consultant team and CTEB, which were relatively similar, and look at other input that they don't score, which is citizen inquiries, safety or condition issues, economic development, regional growth, and safety issues in and of themselves, and then also looking at what's going to be the most effective for the greatest number of our citizens. So that's how it goes there. They do provide, CTEB provides a recommendation to City Council. We have taken the list for an informal endorsement to City Council. The process moving forward would be to take the draft ballot language back to City Council, and what we do is we ask for their endorsement. We are currently slated, and this is where I believe it's Mr. Andrew brought it up. It's because the agendas that they're on haven't been published yet. We are currently planning to go to the July 11th City Council work session. I have a backup date on July 25th for City Council work session, and then the regular council meeting on July 26th, so that we can bring either an endorsement or additional instructions back from City Council in advance of the August board meetings.
Councilmember Williams.
Just a reminder that we're talking about putting the ballot issue on in July, so you might need to advance that a little bit, Gail. Remember that we've made that decision as a board that we want to refer the ballot issue in July.
Right, and that
So
I'm
the endorsement of, so the endorsement you're talking about is council urging
I'm sorry.
a vote.
I was just informed I
That's different.
misspoke. No, but I do have the work session July 11th. The board certifies the ballot July 13th. I have a second work session on July 25th and a council meeting on July 26th.
Right, just wanted to clarify.
And then coming back to the RTA, whatever that second Wednesday is, and first and second Wednesdays in August.
Right.
The 3rd and 10th, is that correct, Rick?
I'm not sure what you're coming back to the RTA board for in August, because the plan is to refer the question to the ballot in July. So you may need to revise that if you're talking about coming in with changes.
I have to take the ballot though too, and when you're not going to give me the ballot though till July 13th.
Right, so I'll defer to the attorney.
But the ballot is composed of the language that's already in the packet plus the combination of all the lists.
Right.
And that's what's going to get referred in July. So any input from the city needs to be received by this board by our next meeting.
Okay, I will work with the clerk's office and adjust it. The good news is the materials would be ready to take to City Council regardless. Just may not have the list of everyone's projects on it, which is really what I was trying to capture.
Okay, one more comment.
So there's been some discussion, and this is for those who, most people who were here may not remember the specific ballot language. I just want to read a couple of the projects that were on RTA 1 so that folks recognize the projects were not in perfect specificity. So let me, and some of them are things, but South Metro Accessibility Phase 1, State Highway 115 to Powers Boulevard. Austin Bluffs Corridor Improvements, Nevada to Academy. Let's see, Austin Bluffs, Nevada improvements. Powers Boulevard right-of-way protection and acquisition, Woodman Road to State Highway 16. And so we certainly did not identify specific parcels that we weren't sure which ones were going to get done. Fillmore Street corridor, I-25 to Centennial. And so I'm not saying this to be obnoxious or anything, but I want folks to recognize that we have never in the ballot language identified every parameter of every project. And there has always been a recognition that this board is setting broad categories that ultimately the voters approve, and it's the local governments and their processes that will go through and define the specifics. And there's that balance between what this board does to make sure the projects are done versus the individual governments who are the ones actually contracting for and designing the roads or the improvements or the bridges. So I just wanted to kind of make sure we understood the history as folks are saying, well, I want more specificity. There is a process through the city, through the county, through the various other entities to come up with more specificity, but it's not been in the ballot language historically, as you could tell from those broad categories of we're going to do improvements, whatever those improvements might be, we're going to do them. But we're not sure at the time. And in part, some of this may change over a 10-year process. And actually, the funding starts in 25. The last of the dollars come in 35. And so some of these projects, if you go the full length of that 10 years, are 13 years away, and the needs of the community may change during that time. The general project is guaranteed in that section A, but the specifics are not something that we have typically put in there. You know, we say widening, we're not saying how far we're widening it. When we say intersection improvements, we're not defining all of those. And so the language that I recognize that there is more detail available through the city or through the county on specific projects, but I did want to emphasize that this has never been part of the RTA process to specifically go into each jurisdiction's responsibility of defining what that road project's going to be, as long as it meets the legal criteria. So I'm sorry for that. I thought it was important, though, that people understand the historical context of what we're dealing with. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. So now we will move on to item number 9C, the Pikes Peak RTA 3 draft ballot issue. Rick or Jennifer?
We're gonna Rochambeau for it. Go ahead.
So again, in accordance with the board approved timetable for the planned PPRT 3 ballot measure in November, this is the first public opportunity for the board to review the narrative without the capital list, but the narrative, both the introductory paragraph and the closing paragraph for review, comment, and revision with the plan that this wording would be finalized at the July meeting. So this is just planned to be a review and with any possible comments and revisions.
Does anyone have any comments or revisions?
I guess I'd point out that a month ago, the CAC had some reservations about Manitou's wording. I would point out that we've made some revisions that's included in the packet. And at last week's CAC meeting, we did get I think a passing grade there. Mr. Godfrey is nodding, so I would call that to your attention.
Okay. Jennifer.
Just quickly, if I may, we've had some substantial discussion over the last year plus in concept about the ballot measure and some executive session conversations. So just for public discussion, I mean, this is the draft ballot measure based on the past ballot measures that we have passed in 2012 and 2017. So utilizing that same type of language, we did add some concepts that we discussed in sort of the several matrix meetings. So I don't want to belabor any of those points if there's no questions. Just a point of clarification regarding timeline and the board's expectations for July, because we're in a bit of a chicken and egg. So the ballot issue is what you see before you here, but with the lists inserted, the footnotes removed, and everything finalized. And that's usually finally adopted and referred as part of calling an election by resolution. I had imagined that resolution coming to the board in August. I just want to clarify if that August timeline for that is acceptable, or if the board was contemplating that the lists would be in final form, combined, so that they're not by member jurisdiction, placed in alphabetical order, and placed within the ballot for the July meeting.
Councilmember Williams.
I think at a minimum, July, we need to prove the substance of what's there. In terms of the making it pretty, I think I'm comfortable with that for August. But at that point, we're saying, okay, yes, this does what we've done. So does that work?
Right. What I had assumed was that this draft here would, if there was no revisions today, the same thing would be finally approved in July with the direction to legal counsel that, and we're also approving the project lists, which are before you, and directing you to take them, consolidate them with the help of staff, put them in alphabetical order and put them in the ballot issue and send it back to us. And then that'll come to you in August in final form, but it will be produced before that. So it could be sent to the board. I would be getting that direction in July.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure I was meeting expectations and that if I came to you in August.
Actually, we thought we'd take a 5-minute break, let you all type it up together and then come back.
This has happened before where I've been making final revisions during a break. So.
Ed, having been the person who's been charged with publishing ballots of things that were put together at the last minute, I can tell you that that's not ideal. So that's why talking about let's approve everything in terms of what goes forward in July and then have you make it look pretty. And then.
Yeah, and I would foresee making it pretty. It might take us a little bit of time to consolidate the list, but that made pretty version would be available for the board weeks ahead of the August meeting so that everyone could have an eagle eye on it, proofreading and telling us what we may have done wrong.
And so then, yes.
And so that all the jurisdictions can make sure it meets the criteria they need as well.
And presuming that we do that in July, we would then notify the clerk in July. We're intending to send him a resolution in August.
To the clerk is that we intend to participate in the coordinated election.
Okay.
We, in August, would have to approve the IGA with the clerk, which would be in process after that notification. And then the resolution certifying the ballot is not due to the clerk until the 9th of September, but we would be passing that in August and could provide it at that point.
Okay, sounds like a plan. So I just see this today. Are we okay just doing this as an informational item and getting down to real business next month unless someone sees in the language? Go ahead, Gal.
Two things. If I do need a final version of the language, so if there are changes that the member governments want, if you could let Miss Ivy know, because I'll want a clean copy to take to council since I'm doing it. Going to be
Sure.
trying to get it in advance for what my original schedule was. I would ask that one. And then two, I have a question for Miss Ivy. With the project list, do you also need the information that's going to go in the voter's handbook at the same time? And I'm not sure who does
Mr.
that.
Williams.
So just to clarify, because this is a tax-related measure, it may need to have certain information submitted from the jurisdiction, like estimated revenues and other things like that. I'm not just.
Yeah, I think so. I think what you're asking is the Tabor notice information?
Right.
Yeah, which I do not know.
No, my question was, so we've talked about that they would have potentially have more description, maybe potentially on projects in the voter handbook versus what's on the ballot, or is that incorrect?
No, not the voter handbook. The voter guide has specified information under Tabor that has to be in it.
Okay.
But in terms of the expanded descriptions of things, I think that's going to be more where we say you can go to the city's website and get additional information.
Okay, thank you for the
Okay,
clarification.
thank you, because she was scaring me. I thought maybe I had missed a portion of election law.
Well, I'm, whether you can legally do that or not is different, but yeah, the idea is to have, at least from my standpoint, would be to be able to say, you know, if you're a voter and you're not sure, here's where you can go, and hopefully have links on here. Please provide comments or, you know, whatever. Click here to be added to the list for information about this project as it goes forward, or, you know, all that kind of stuff that you might do on a county or city webpage.
So on the actual countywide published Tabor notice, I will confer with the clerk and make sure that Jennifer and Gal know by Monday, you know, when those kind of comments are due. So we can secure that process through the elections office fairly easily.
And then there is a separate part of that which allows members of the public to submit either pro or con statements that are then compiled. That does not come from the board.
That's what I was talking about.
But there's three elements to the Tabor notice. There's the factual information. How much is the tax? How much is going to get raised? The language, and that is statutorily required. In addition, there's a pro statement, which may be submitted, and a con statement, which may be submitted. And it's the clerk's job to synthesize that process if 500 people submit pro comments or whatever. Not that that's ever happened. Typically, you have a couple at most, but and then to make sure that the comments that are done follow the requirements of the law.
Go ahead, Rick.
And is there, I'm recalling there's a 500 word limit on those comments. Is that still the case?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're down to September's problem. That's good. All right, so anyone have any current clarifications on the language that they see? I think the CAC has approved it. We discussed it pretty thoroughly a few months ago.
I'd just say, I think it does a good job of explaining what's taking place. It makes it clear this is an extension. It does provide notice to people, and particularly once you add in all the projects, it's going to be way more specific than any other ballot issue they're going to see for a long time. That's all I have to say.
Okay, so we will approve the final language hopefully next month. So now we can move on to our next item. We have a City of Colorado Springs monthly change order and property acquisition report. Gail, that is available in our packet, correct, to view?
That is correct, Madam Chair, and I'm available for questions if there are any.
Does anyone have any questions on that? Okay, that item is concluded. Item 9E is the same thing in El Paso County monthly change order report. Josh?
Same here. If there's any questions.
Okay. All right, so seeing no questions, the quarterly reports from member governments, Rick?
Just information, this is what's submitted from the 6 member governments. Be glad to take any questions or refer the questions to the authors of the reports.
Okay, there's no questions on that. Item number 10A is the appointment of 2 at-large members. Rick?
According to board policy for the appointment of CAC at-large alternate and at-large regular members, that has to go to the board subcommittee comprised of the board chair, the board vice chair, and the CAC chair. That subcommittee did meet last Thursday, the 2nd, and interviewed 2 candidates for the 3 open positions. There's one open at-large regular position, 2 at-large alternate positions open. So the subcommittee are interviewed Ms. Emily Magnuson and Mr. Tony Joya, and they are recommending Emily Magnuson for the completion of a partial term as an at-large regular CAC member with a term ending December 31 of 2023, and also recommending Mr. Tony Joya for a partial term as an at-large alternate CAC member with a term also ending December 31 of 2023.
This fine, move approval.
I'll second John Graham.
Okay, very good candidates. The interviews were enjoyable. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes. Item number 11, are there any Pprta member announcements? Gail? Oh, Jennifer first.
Sorry, I forgot I was going to just let everyone know about the 5th amended and restated IGA and status for consideration at each member government. El Paso County and Green Mountain Falls both approved that yesterday. Rama is considering it tonight. Callahan is considering it on June 13th. Manitou, I've gotten conflicting reports. I'm told they approved it yesterday and that they were scheduled to approve it on June 28th, but either way.
I'm sorry, for the IGA, there'll be a future date. Last night, we
Okay.
approved the revised definition of how we were going to spend the money.
Oh, okay,
That-
great.
that's what
So
we did.
that is scheduled per the clerk for June 28th. And City of Colorado Springs, I am advised, has scheduled it for July 26th. So just FYI.
And if that's not acceptable, I can ask the clerk if we can make changes because I had them going with the list that was going to be the issue before it. Okay, great.
And Gail, any announcements on your end?
A couple quick ones. As Councilor Avila mentioned, the Airport Road over Spring Creek ribbon cutting is tomorrow at 2 p.m. Hopefully, I know Commissioner Williams will be there and hopefully others can join us as well. I did want to mention, we do have, the city is going to be sponsoring our first inaugural Citizens Academy on July 22nd. And this is actually going to be more for if you have CAC members that you would like to participate in that. I will try to get them on the list. We do have limited seating in these, but we will be intending to offer those about twice a year. I got some good news to share with you all after a long day today. I brought asked for letters of support for discretional federal grants. We did receive notice that we have received our first one. It's for the CRISI, or it's that Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvements. And this is really good news for us. It's a smaller grant, a $2.5 million award from the feds for a $3.5 million or $3.8 million total award, but it really federalizes those Nevada, Tejon, and Shooks Run bridges. And we actually laid out a plan to go and capture money, construction dollars in the future. So we'll continue to press hard on that to bring federal dollars in. And anyway, that's it.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, well, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn. John Graham.
Carrie Gaitner, I'll second.
Okay, everybody, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Sorry about the long meeting. Thank you. Have a good day.
Come here, you.